This took place about 10 years ago. So, there I was in my beat-up Jeep Wrangler, rolling home from my girlfriend's house at about 2 a.m. It's pitch dark on this twisty back road with forest on my left and a Christmas tree farm on my right. The road is pretty narrow and has very little shoulder, but not much bank either, just gravel and grass really. I'm going way faster than I should be when I come around the next bend and there's a grey Camaro with black racing stripes. Looks like maybe an SS from the 70s, but it's hard to say. Parked completely sideways, blocking nearly the full width of the road, headlights shining into the tree farm. And there's this guy, leather jacket and jeans, slicked back salt and pepper hair, leaned back casually on the side of the car smoking a cigarette. I slammed my brakes and managed to bring it to a slow roll. I'm too trusting of a person, so I think, oh wow, must be having some car trouble. I'll roll my window down and pull up to see if he needs help. Before I can even start rolling my window down, this dude tosses his cigarette to the ground and full-on starts walking at me. Not along the side of the road or toward my driving side conversationally, but straight into my headlights, straight at my still-moving Wrangler in fact, and he looks furious. So at this point, I'm like, alright, forget this. He's either angry for how fast I was going, or a plainclothes cop, or something like that. So I gun it, and yank the wheel over, jumping off into the grass on the side of the road, whip around the tail of his car, and I distinctly recall, for some reason, the taillights feeling extremely bright as I passed. This angry red just sort of filling my vision, and lighting the whole cabin of my Wrangler up. Eventually, I pull back up on the road and check my rear view, afraid that I'd hit him, or afraid that he might be after me now, or just plain afraid, who knows, but when I do, there's nothing. No car, no man, no illumination on the tree farm, nothing. Now I do stop. I pull over and I get out, thinking that I must have gone further than I thought and around another curve or something. But no. This is definitely the curve. I've only made it about another 50 feet, if that. In fact, I can see my torn up tracks in the grass from where I went, both where I got back on the road and where I went off initially. To this day, I wish I had the sense to go back and check for that cigarette butt or anything, any sign of him. But I was way too creeped out at that point. So in the end, I got back in my Jeep and I got out of there. So I moved in with an old roomie, Cassidy, and her 2 dogs back in August of 2021. We had an apartment for a year prior to moving to the duplex. The new place was on the south end of Columbus, not the best area, but I can deal with addicts and persistent homeless people, no problem. What I couldn't deal with, though, was whatever was actually there. Move-in was normal chaos. Boxes, sleeping on a mattress with your bed frame next to you, painting, etc. Nothing out of the ordinary happening. After a few weeks, I was constantly misplacing things though. This is far from unheard of for me, but it was sort of out of control. Keys I put in the middle of an empty table wouldn't be there 10 minutes later. I'd start looking for them and then eventually they'd be back where I left them. This wasn't daily or anything, but enough to mention for sure. Duplex was 2 stories, terrible creaky floors, thin walls, and I could hear my neighbor's farts. And for a bit, it sounded like somebody was walking on the 2nd floor, but nobody was home up there. In the end, I just assumed it was the neighbors and I could hear them. That assumption, though, was disproven when my neighbors were out on their shared porch and I was inside, and I heard the footsteps and thought, oh, okay, so we really do have a little ghost here. I mean, whatever, I can deal with that. The footsteps were light and always in a sort of quick patter, like a little kid who doesn't know how to skip trying to skip or whatever. I'd get a tap on my shoulder here and there as well, but all harmless stuff. Soon I started hearing my roommate ask for me or say my name when she wasn't home. I never said anything to her in fear of sounding bonkers, but fast forward to like November of 2021, Roommate comes to me in the morning and asked if I had anything spooky happen in the house beyond the footsteps and such. I told her then about hearing her ask for me when she wasn't home. She paused and did one of those eyes slightly closed, okay sort of soft nods, told me that she's been having the same thing happen, but obviously me asking for her. She never wanted to say anything for the same reason, but as she was falling asleep last night, her mirror fell. One of those cheap Walmart floor mirrors. Well, it didn't fall technically because it started to tip over, paused for a second, cracked, and then fell. She got freaked out by this, but didn't know if she was just lucid dreaming or what. After she mentioned this and we both acknowledged hearing stuff, it was then that things began to pick up a smidge. The footsteps became more frequent. I had a few taps on my back and would occasionally catch something just in the corner of my eye, but never full on. And I mean, things like this happen, but nothing crazy happened for a bit. But late January, Cassidy is out for the night and I'm passing out in my bed. I'm in that sort of juicy spot, part comfort and cozy levels reached and where you know you're about to fall asleep. But then, I feel breath in my ear and hear I'm downstairs, come on. At that, I get covered in goosebumps. I am now even thinking about it. My phone dings and there's a notification from my security camera downstairs. I immediately text my roommate and surround myself with her dogs. We chat about it the next day and agreed upon, yeah, spooky for sure, but like, what can we do? And we move on. Everything stays the same for a while, until Cassidy moved out mid-April of 2022, and obviously took her dogs with her. And then, everything got wild fast. Within the first week of solo house life, I'm in my room laying in my bed. The foot of my bed faces the door, TV is to the right of it. I'm not sleeping, just sort of chilling watching TV. And from the top of the doorframe is a smack 3 times, like undeniably, like an open palm hitting it. Not like, oh, what's that noise, but more like, to heck with that. That night, I go and sleep downstairs. I then move out of my bedroom and into Cassidy's empty room the next day. No issues for a night or two, but I'm on my bed, which is on the floor, not about to take my bed frame apart and reset it up and all that. I think I was either doing nonsense on my phone or something on my laptop, but either way I was doing nothing important. The door to the hallway is across from me in the left corner of the room, and from the hallway, an unfamiliar, wildly uncomfortable noise. The quick little footsteps that I became accustomed to were not like this. They got heavier and slower, pacing down the hallway. Not constant, but enough for me to just hate everything about this. I stand up and go to the door, poke my head into the hallway, and it was then that I have my chest brushed. Not like shoved or pushed, not caressed, but just like, yeah, I can touch you sort of thing. Message received loud and clear. Out loud, I say something like, okay, bud, I'll go. I go to the bed and start packing a bag. My back is at the corner of the room, like against the wall, and I can feel something there with me, like right there. My feelings are confirmed too when over my shoulder, suddenly, I hear a growl. Not like a dog growling, but a distinguishable sound. The best way that I can explain it is if you asked a tired, overweight guy to impersonate an empty stomach. And at that, I dip so fast. I stay at my art studio and I go back during the day and try to push it to the back of my mind while I start packing my stuff. At this point, I'm moving or attempting to. Credit score and financial situation aren't ideal, but I've seen enough horror movies and I know staying helps nothing. After staying at my art studio a few nights and spending the days there packing with no activity, I decided to stay another night. After all, my studio is not the most comfortable place to sleep. First night back, nothing, just the overwhelming fear that it's going to happen again. Second night, nothing. Third night, same. Okay, so maybe I have carbon monoxide poisoning or something the other night. I try to breathe easy, but that stuff was terrifying, so easier said than done, right? Once I somewhat settled back in while continuing to pack up, that was when the footsteps started back up. Things progressed like a heroin addict's tolerance after a quick stint in rehab. Then I started catching little glimpses of it too, where it will be like right at my shoulder, just enough in my peripheral for me to notice that it's there. As soon as my eyes stop focusing on that area and my head turns, there it is, in that corner. A bunch of creepy stuff started happening too at this point. Here are some examples. So I was showering naked, as most people do, right? Recently removed shirt was on the floor leaning on the closed door. I rinsed my face and then my shirt is halfway under the door. My leg was grabbed, like legit pulled while walking up my steps. My little closet door got slammed shut at one point. The house got unbearable, especially upstairs. Like the second that I go up there, it would be right on my back. Not touching me, but like just right there, right out of sight. You could feel it. Every step that I took, it took with me. This wasn't just at night anymore too. It was constant. Keep in mind too that I'm packing up to move, so I really don't have a choice but to be there sometimes. I never go at night anymore, and if I do have to go upstairs to pack, I'm supermarket sweep styling that stuff. But my final to heck with this was at the end of May. I was in my room finishing up packing. My room was hands down the worst spot in the house too. It just did not want me there at all. Its presence in there was so intense, but this time I ended up sprinting out of my house and I just never went back. Looking out of the windows from my room while closing a box, in the reflection, I see it. Sort of like when you look down a well and it's just sort of pitch black. It's like that. It's at my wall, like 7 feet tall, just looming. I turn around, but then it's gone. I'm certainly a bit uneasy, to say the least. It was like a magician coming up with new tricks to wow the audience. Just replace wow with terrify and audience with me, I suppose. But throughout this nightmare, I would often set up my phone along with the security camera. I just wanted to get something to prove that I wasn't bonkers, and this was the last time that I would have to do that. So, like I had done in the past, my trembling hand sets up my terrible iPhone 6 and hits record. I go downstairs and when I come back to check if there was anything there, I run the recording back, and although I can hear footsteps and floor creaks from myself moving around and all that, I hear "get out." And so, at that, I certainly did. On my birthday in May of 2014, I went to the bar with a friend to celebrate. We were sitting on the patio when another of my friends, Steve, showed up at the bar. We were laughing and having a good time. Steve got excited and pointed to his new motorcycle parked across the street. I looked over it and it was like somebody dragged a dark black blanket over my eyes, like a dark storm rolling in over the ocean. I literally saw it. I felt like he was going to die on that machine, and it even slipped out of my mouth to him. He promised me that he would be okay, and so I dropped it. 29 days later, he was driving home on that motorcycle and his front wheel went up on the trunk of the person in front of him. He spun out, and unfortunately, he died there. It's been 10 years and I still think about this. Honestly, I wish I pushed harder about keeping him off that motorcycle, but I didn't. I lost a great friend that year, and I no longer remember his laugh, which was my favorite thing about him. On the other hand, I feel partially responsible for putting that into the universe, sort of like I killed him. I get to live with this the rest of my life, and I'm really sorry that I didn't press harder. I'm sorry that I lived longer than him, and I'm really sorry that he didn't get to see his little sister get married too. I'm sorry that I couldn't face his mother about this. So I work at a bar that has a back alley that then leads into a small secluded parking lot. There are several large trash cans, and many small ones there too, and there are some addicts, homeless folks, etc., who will come to the alley pretty often. Usually they're pretty harmless and just look through the trash or ask for $1, but sometimes they aren't, and tonight was one of those times. So I went out to the back to throw out a bag of trash when I noticed a man walking quickly by the farthest group of garbage cans from the back door, which also happens to be the one that I use. He looked in my direction. I don't think that he knew that I could see him, and then as he saw me walking toward him and the trash can, he quickly and quietly hid himself in the dark behind the trash cans. I didn't see where he ended up, but it scared me a lot. I mean, I was the only one around, and I knew that he was hiding there because I would have seen him walk past if not, and it was the only way to go, so really, he was hiding there waiting for me to do, well, I don't want to think about that. I left my bag of trash right there where it was, and I immediately walked back inside. I hope that he left soon after I went back in because I would hate to see somebody get hurt. If you're familiar with the Denver area, I lived in the Clayton neighborhood on York. As with all millennials, the rental market crippled me and I had to find a place with charm, aka a 1920s brick duplex with 1970s updates in the year of our Lord 2022. But as a recently divorced man with 50-50 custody, my bank account dictated my residence. To give you a sense of the space, it was a shotgun adjacent style home, 900 square feet, upstairs, with an unfinished basement that was really only used for laundry and housing spiders. My daughter and I had rooms on either end of the 10-foot narrow hallway, with the world's smallest full bathroom splitting the distance. For the first few months, it was just an old house on a busy street. Fire trucks, ambulances, and cop cars flew down the street each night. So much so that I had to get blackout curtains or my room would legitimately look like a knockoff disco of flashing lights. My daughter was 5 at the time and she had a hard time adjusting to living in 2 houses. She would frequently climb into bed halfway through the night because something had woken her up and she was scared. I would feel her crawl in and over me routinely, hands, elbows, and knees, feet even all haphazardly crawling all over me. Now one night, around 2 a.m, I felt her, but this time not crawling into the bed, but crawling out. I felt her tug my shirt, pulling me to the side to crawl out of the door, and I don't know why the change in direction woke me up, but it gave me an uneasy feeling, so I rolled over to grab her so she wouldn't fall off the bed. I murmured something like, "Kiddo, do you need to go to the bathroom?" But as I turned to grab her, I felt nothing. My arms folded into each other and my eyes shot open instantly, thinking that she tumbled off the bed. As I sat up groggily, I saw her standing in the doorway, but that was when I realized that it wasn't her. I can still remember the face, close to my daughter's age, a slight smirk, innocent and playful. She wore a yellow sundress with white flowers. She's burned into my memory, but not in a frightening way, I suppose. I turned to look at my daughter, passed out cold, snoring on the other side. When I quickly snapped my head back to where the little girl was standing, whoever she was gone. I've told that story 1,000,000 times, and it wasn't the last experience that I had there, and the little girl certainly wasn't the only person that I saw. Now, for some time, it was unsettling thinking about the little girl. I hated scary movies. The jump scenes always made me flinch, but seeing her that night was different. There was no smash cut to a twisted face, no loud sound, just a little girl standing there looking at me with a soft smile. If anything, it felt like a roommate messing with me maybe. I felt her, I felt my shirt being tugged. I felt the weight on my chest, which means that it wasn't a dream. It was a physical experience. Honestly, I felt like I was losing my mind for some time after that. I hadn't told anyone yet. there wasn't a way that I could share it and not make it sound like I was just dreaming. And honestly, I had started to convince myself that it probably was just a dream. Unfortunately, or I don't know, perhaps fortunately, the next day would make it much harder to convince myself that I was dreaming. So if you know anything about rec hockey, then you know it's hard to find open sheets of ice. My beer league games mostly started at 9 or later. I had leaned into playing, and as a single dad, needed help with my daughter on the late weeknights. My mum offered to come over and watch her while I played, which was a nice break from the week and a good way to distract me from the night before as well. When I got home at around 11, my mum was in the living room reading a book. She walked over to me and almost hugged me until this stink of the hockey gear caught up to her. I still remember her looking at me and saying, "So it was kind of a weird night." I put my keys on the table and asked her what she meant, and she said, "Well, your electric razor turned on in the bathroom a few times." I chalked it up to just a weird coincidence, but then she said, "And I kept getting up to check on Lou. It was weird because I thought I was hearing her run up and down the hallway, and I could have sworn that I heard her giggle, but every time that I got up to check on her, the door was closed and she was asleep." It was real. She experienced it. I didn't tell her about that night too. Honestly, I didn't want to admit it to myself because it meant the night before, the little girl, that it was all real, and that she wanted to play or something. Anyway, I've since moved in with my girlfriend in a house that feels quiet and calm. Sitting outside now, it's a lot easier to process through everything, but after the experiences I had with seeing the girl and my mum telling me that she had heard the little girl running up and down the hallway, laughing and trying to get her attention, the house felt open to more activity at the time. The summer in Denver is warmer than most people think, and this house had no air conditioning. Even with fans, it was easy to climb up to 80 inside with even the best fan setup. This was honestly my first step for my debunking too, because I thought that I was having some type of, like fever or heat-induced experience. I bought several swamp cooler style fans, and while I felt comfortable temp-wise, it definitely didn't help. My next thought was carbon monoxide or black mold or something. I became obsessed with trying to find out why I was hearing, seeing, and feeling things, but in the end, I couldn't find an answer and nothing helped. That summer too was a cluster of experiences. I can't recall each one in order because it was easily weekly, sometimes almost a daily feeling in fact. The main feeling though was what I could only describe as, like static energy. I tried to explain it to people like standing next to one of those electrical towers. It wasn't audible, but I could feel it walking in the hallway, in my bedroom, and the kitchen steps down to the basement. Like, for instance, the basement steps, they were old and creaky, and initially I would think that it was the house settling, and to a degree it probably was the case. However, there were two very specific instances that it was not the case. One night I was brushing my teeth and I heard my cat's ping pong ball bouncing in the kitchen and down the steps. This happened 3 times. A steady bounce, bounce, bounce on the tile floors, and then a hit off the wall leading down the steps, bouncing down one stair and hitting the door to the backyard. After the 3rd time, I called out to my cat to knock it off, and I remember so vividly sticking my head out of the door and looking into the kitchen, and there was my cat, not in the kitchen but laying in my daughter's room, in a very cat-like pose of not caring. But there was just no way that she could have made it over there and lounged in the time that I had heard the last ball bounce down. On another occasion, I was working from home and had my computer set up in my dining room. Again, in shotgun fashion, the house basically was a straight line from the back door to the front door. My desk was set up in a way that I could look out the front window of the living room to my back room. I was on a team call with an employee, and that's when I heard footsteps running up and down the back stairs, to the point where I had to tell my employee to give me a second. I leaned back and told the cat to knock it off and looked back at the screen when my face went white, and I did a double take down the stairs, because when I had looked back at the screen, I had noticed my cat, again in a very casual pose, sitting on the couch in the main room. I had told my employees about it, and when this particular one experienced it with me, I felt very validated by this because the steps were clear enough that they were audible but quick and playful, and they had heard it too. And if it wasn't a cat, then it was something small and curious, and I really don't know how to explain it. Now, this next one is hard to describe, but I'll try. So, as more things happened, I started talking about it more, generally on the phone or on team calls. If I was in a room, the hallway or kitchen and started to talk about the little girl, I could suddenly feel her around me. What this felt like was a sort of quieting of surrounding noises. If you can think about the sensation when you faint, the noise kind of muting or to a quiet ringing, almost like a tunnel hearing instead of a tunnel vision, that was a trigger for me. The next sensation would be a classic goosebumps, and then kind of like an inner radar where I'd just see a part of the room in my head. A lot of the times it was the hallway, but I'd just have this feeling of like, hey, look here. All three of those would intensify, and I would have to intentionally say no and walk away to sort of break it off. Honestly, I don't think that I'm doing it justice to just how constant the feelings and the little sounds were in this place. I only slept with headphones there. Nothing ever felt evil, I guess, but I just couldn't keep up with the constant movement and energy. I needed to sleep, and things were too curious with me, and it got to the point where I'd pretty regularly feel a little tug here or a pressure there on my bed. I stopped letting my cat stay in my room to try and debunk that, and it persisted. I told my mum about all of this, and she, for my birthday, told me about her friend, who apparently was a medium. Even with all of my personal experiences, I had serious doubts about this all, and I made sure not to give him any info prior to and told my mum to do the same. When I showed up to his house though, we sat down and I did a tarot reading, first time I'd ever done it, a little cleanse and then dowsing rods too. This was when my inner skeptic certainly kicked in. I mean, here I was holding 2 rods apparently communing with the dead. Nothing happened. I held them in my hands and asked a few questions, and they limply moved, but nothing of consequence. I remember him asking me to ask a general question about anything, so I paused and asked if I should leave my house. The rods didn't move, but he looked at me and said, "I want to talk about your house. There's a girl there, isn't there?" I nodded and said, "Yeah, my daughter," and he smirked. "No, you've seen a little girl. She's like a bedroom, a hallway, stairs or something. Very playful." At that, I remember putting the dowsing rods down and just asked, "What does she look like to you?" At this point, I was trying to see if it was a tell I was giving off or something to make all of this make sense. "She's not from now. I see her in like a homemade type of sundress. She's probably close in age to your daughter. Flowers. I see flowers." I was lost in the vision of the girl that he was describing to perfection. "She likes to play at night a lot, doesn't she? You have balls that she throws for you or a pet or something. She's not evil, she just likes having nice people there. And she isn't the only one there too." Honestly, whether I had fully understood it or not, I was at terms with the little girl that I had seen, but there was something else in the house, something older and bigger. At times, the movement that I heard and the energy that I had felt was different, heavier and not as playful. I really did not like hearing him say that. He told me that the girl was someone to talk to, basically to talk to her like a parent if I was over her playing and needed a quiet space. But as I told him what I experienced with feeling the tunnel hearing, the inner vision of where people were, he told me to be careful. It sounded like I was sensitive and that thinking was one thing, but talking directly to something, allowing them in, could lead to attachment. I can assure you that that day was a long drive back home. 2 nights later, I was laying in my bed, and I heard books on my shelf being flipped through. At first, I sort of chalked it up to the fan, but after about 5 minutes of the noise, I turned the fan off and it kept going, like somebody flicking through books. I sat up quickly, 2 or 3 times flashing my phone's flashlight to try and catch something, but there was nothing. After one more attempt, I turned off the flashlight and I sat in my bed and said, "I need to go to bed now and I need you to be quiet in here. Please, go to bed." All the sensations suddenly hit me. The quiet noise, the goosebumps, seeing where she was, and then it was quiet. It stayed quiet. After that, I said thank you, and then I fell asleep. August 11, 2001. It's easy to remember the exact date because it was the same night as the premiere of Samurai Jack on Cartoon Network. I was 8 years old at the time, and this was a big deal. So of course I had a sleepover with my best friend Kay at her mum's house. We slept in the living room so that we could watch TV as we fell asleep. I was showing Kay my new favorite movie, Titan AE, and around 3 a.m., we were woken up by decorative indoor wind chimes. For whatever reason, they were going crazy, like there were actual wind gusts in the house. At the same time, it sounded like a whole pack of cats fighting in the front yard. Being children, it freaked us out, and we decided to go tell her mum that we were going to move to the bedroom for the rest of the night. When we opened the door to the room that her mum and 12-year-old sister had been sleeping in, we couldn't see them in the bed. Kay climbed into the bed and was like, "What the heck? There's no one here." So we assumed that they had moved to one of the other bedrooms, but there were 3 after all. So we began the search, but they weren't in any of the rooms. We started turning on every light in the house and getting a bit frantic. Doors were locked, keys were on the rack, car was in the driveway. Kay was freaking out because she thought that her mum's stalker got out of prison and abducted her mum and sister. Now, the next thing that I remember was the sunlight was what woke me up in the next morning. We were back on the living room floor as if we had never gotten up, with no memory of going back to sleep. But the weirdest thing is that we both recalled vividly looking for her mum and sister. So, naturally, we interrogated them the second that we saw them. Luckily, my bestie's mum is pretty open-minded and she actually believed that we weren't making it up, and that was pretty strange as well. Her mother, to this day, continues to recall the details of that day, but unfortunately my friend has somehow completely forgotten that it happened. I usually get a bit of a dismissive reaction when I share this story. My husband believes that it was a dream or sleep paralysis, which I have no problem considering, but, I mean, come on, it's not that. I do wonder how Kay would forget something that we used to talk about obsessively as we got older. Others have suggested that I ask her mum and sister if they still remember our story. I will soon, but they're dealing with something at the moment, and it would be a bit inappropriate to bother them with this at this stage. But like I said, the last time that I talked to her, she recalled it, and she remembers that night in detail. This is a bit of a weird story that I actually just learned about last week. So I'm 26 years old and asked my parents why I'm the only one out of my siblings that knows Urdu. It's a Pakistani language. We all know our parents didn't teach us, and they barely speak Urdu around the house, but only when they're talking to family overseas. But even that didn't happen with regularity enough that I would have picked it up. My mum said that my great-grandpa taught me, and I said that I don't remember him, and she said that he died slightly before she was born. Apparently, when I was around 2 years old, I had an imaginary friend named the same thing as my great-grandfather from my mother's side. It was a fairly unique name, and growing up in America, I'm sure that I've never heard that name anywhere else before. My mum said that I would talk to him in English allegedly, and he would speak back to me in Urdu until I learned, and I was near fluent by the time that I was 3. Mind you, I don't remember any of this, but after I found this out, weirdly, I had a dream last night where I got to meet my great-grandfather, and he explained to me that he taught me this because he was tired of watching all of his family lose their culture. I tried speaking back to him, and he was speaking in Urdu in the dream, which has never happened before to me, and I promised him that I would try to learn more about my culture, and asked if he wanted me to tell his family anything from him. He mentioned my youngest uncle by name and asked me to tell him not to ride his motorcycle too fast, since that's how his dad died apparently. I woke up a few hours ago and I asked my mum how her dad died, and she said that he was in a motorcycle accident when he was driving too quickly and apparently slid under a garbage truck. I immediately called my uncle after this in Pakistan, and I told him not to drive recklessly and that his grandpa came to me in a dream and explained that to me. I don't know what he thought about that, and I don't know what's going on or how or why this is happening to me, but it's so weird and intriguing that I just feel like I have to share it. I am absolutely confused and simultaneously amazed by this whole thing. I want to be able to learn more from him and talk to him again, but I don't even know how I would go about it. Has this ever happened to anybody else? And if it has, what did you do? So, I had an experience about 10 years ago that I'm still searching for answers about. I'm mostly curious to know if anyone else has seen a humanoid similar to the ones that I'll describe, as I haven't been able to find any accounts describing anything like them in all these years. This happened around late winter, early spring of 2015 in upstate New York. Early one morning, after my husband and child left for the day, I was tired and went back to bed. This was about 8:30 in the morning. I have a distinct memory of having been dozing off when the bedroom door, which I was facing, quietly opened and 2 or more humanoid creatures entered. They made absolutely no sound and approached me so quickly that I could barely register what was happening. All I remember is one approaching close enough to my face to make out how they looked. Next thing that I know, I'm waking up in my bed and over 3 hours had passed, which I remember just didn't feel possible. I also remember the beings right away because I was so baffled at how it had gotten so late in the day. But after a few minutes, I remembered what I'd seen before falling asleep and was instantly filled with just dread and confusion. I almost instantly started gaslighting myself about it, convinced that it was just a simple case of being in and out of dream state. But I still remember what these things look like, and feel confused about it to this day. Here's how I would describe these things. They were a light off-white color with absolutely no distinguishing features. No eyes, ears, nose, genitals, nipples, hair, nothing. Just average male height, average male build, while humanoids with skin or some type of outer covering that looked almost like, like wide white ace bandaging or something. Basically like a tightly and freshly wrapped mummy almost, but there was their skin, or I'm assuming that it was their skin at least. Perhaps they were disguised. The craziest thing to me though is still how they simply had no eyes, not even slits in their fabric like skin. I will add here that this is not my first encounter with the otherworldly, but it is the one that has baffled me the most, and the one that makes me wonder if maybe I've been abducted. So, can anyone relate to this experience or sighting? Have you ever heard of anything like this, or seen anything like this? The last few days when my daughter wakes up, she tells me how Grandpa is dead right away when she opens her eyes. Why is Grandpa dead, Mummy? Or, Mummy, Grandpa is dead. My dad passed away 6 weeks ago. I just calmly say, yes, Grandpa is in heaven now, sweetie. Last night, though, she wakes up at 2 a.m. hysterical that something bit her. We sleep together, and this hasn't ever happened before, but I just figure that she's had a bad dream or something. She was hysterical, though, saying, "Mama, I don't want to stay in this room. Let's go downstairs. I'm scared." Today, she was on the toilet going to the washroom, and I hear her saying, "You're bad, stop it." I come around the corner and I say, "Who are you talking to?" And she's like, "This boy here, he's a bad boy," and just points and sort of stares. I'm like, "What boy?" And she looks at me and back to the same spot and says, "The boy here, Mama, he bit my toes." Now I'm just like, this is weird, but okay. I'm like, "Okay, is he tickling your toes or biting them?" And she replied that he's biting them and he's so bad and naughty. Anyway, our imaginary friend's comment at 2.5 years old? Like, here I am thinking, do I need to burn some sage in my home or something? This whole thing has me a little bit freaked out. This happened to me back in October at and around my university, the Thursday prior to the week before Halloween. So I went to the student union at my university for lunch and spotted this couple around my age I haven't seen before in front of me in line. I felt something was off about them immediately too. I made brief eye contact with the girl while I was ordering, and she seemed to be waiting for her drink. The weird thing though is that I saw straight black from her eyes. I went back to my apartment a bit shaken up by this, but forgot about the experience later on in the day. Now, later that night, I decided to go out to a bar with my roommate. His nickname is Prop, and there are 2 rooms in the club that I frequent. I walked into the second room to grab a drink, and as soon as I entered, immediately after obtaining my drink, I saw the exact same couple that I saw at the student union earlier that day, just seemingly dancing the night away. And this was my last full memory for the next 4 hours. I had bits and pieces of consciousness, but they were blurry and lasted only like 10 seconds each time. My next full memory was me slumped on a park bench while Prop and his girlfriend ordered us an Uber back to our apartment. Keep in mind, I only had a few drinks throughout the night, nowhere near enough to black out or throw up even once. But what followed was the worst vomiting spell of my life that lasted into the following evening, even worse than the near-death food poisoning as a toddler I had, and times where I drank way too much. Anyway, the next day, Prop told me him and his frat brothers were looking for me at the bar for over an hour, and I was nowhere to be found. They assumed that I'd gone home, but I wasn't answering my calls, obviously. He also stated that he ordered an Uber as soon as he eventually found me, after over an hour of waiting. And apparently, here I was standing and rambling with my eyes rolled in the middle of the bar as if I was possessed or something. Prop said that he had never been so confused or frightened in his life, even though he is one of the largest skeptics and tough guys out there. I haven't seen this couple since then. However, I have a few distinct eerie memories or dreams that they've appeared in. I believe that this may have been a black-eyed human encounter, an entity who followed me, or an alien abduction in human form, something like that. This is not the only peculiar phenomenon I've had, as a series of astounding events on Sunday has led me to share this here. I also have a friend who had a similar experience at his university, but I'm unsure if they're actually related or not. For the first time in our home last night, my wife and I experienced separate things within about 30 minutes of each other. We just returned from a week in Miami Sunday night. My wife was pretty wiped out still yesterday and went to bed at about 9 p.m. last night. I stayed up until about 11. Our master bedroom has the bedroom itself, the bathroom, and a reading room that we have a treadmill in off of the bathroom. The treadmill itself faces away from the bathroom and towards the window, so the screen on the treadmill is visible from the bathroom. The screen is pretty large and it's basically a small TV in the unit. When not in use, the screen dims to a standby mode and it's still lit, but it's very dim. Now, when I entered and turned the bathroom light on, I'm facing the room with the treadmill. It's maybe 25 feet from the doorway that I'm standing in to the treadmill. In the darkness of the treadmill room, the perfectly rectangular screen is partially eclipsed in the bottom left corner by a round object. It looked as if someone was holding a balloon in my field of vision directly between my eyes and the treadmill. There was no discernible features of whatever was blocking my view, just round in the dark. I flipped the second bathroom light on, and when I look back into the treadmill room, nothing is there and I can see the full rectangular screen perfectly. I investigate the room and I find nothing. Putting this out of my mind and assuming that I was just seeing things, I brush my teeth and eventually I get into bed. I never felt any sense of fear or dread, but perhaps 30 minutes later, I put my phone on my nightstand and roll over to go to sleep, and my wife immediately shoots up and cries out in the dark and frantically crawls into my arms, stuttering that there's a bear in the room. At this point, I'm thinking, I did see something, and there's somebody in the house. Flashlight lights up in the room and nothing, of course. My wife even got up to look around and under the bed. We calm down eventually and we go to sleep. Today we discussed it and she said that she saw a black bear walking towards her side of the bed, although couldn't say if it was from the bathroom or the hallway. It apparently crouched down next to the bed and that's when she freaked out, and was then, obviously, gone. For reference, we bought this house in 2021, and we've never experienced anything like this. But what do you guys think? Coincidence? Seeing something in her sleep? Was it just nothing as she was half asleep anyway? Does seeing a bear have any meaning? Any and all thoughts are welcome, as this one honestly has me stumped. For context, I was probably about 11 or 12 at the time that this happened, and I lived in a tiny town in Florida called Mulberry. We basically had a McDonald's, a local corner store, and then a couple of mum and pop shops. They were all about 10 to 20 minutes apart by car. My neighborhood connected to Highway 60, which is a pretty infamous spot for bad accidents. Now, one day, it was around 11 p.m. when we decided to get McDonald's for dinner that day. But my dad was a truck driver, so getting dinner late wasn't too uncommon. Me and my brother, he would have been around maybe 18 to 20, tagged along and we drove over to the restaurant. Streets were pretty dead, and the drive-thru was thankfully empty. We were all talking about something on the way back when it went silent. On the right side of the road was a woman, walking. Something about the way that she walked was just odd too. Her arms didn't raise or move with her steps, they just sort of hung there. Her pace was slower than a normal walking pace, and she wore a super long white dress that was practically untouched. I remember my dad kind of had a weirded out laugh like, why was she wearing that at this hour? The weirdest part was the moments after we drove past. We couldn't recall what she looked like at all. We all could recall long hair and the long dress, obviously, but we all collectively sort of blanked out on facial features. When I turned, she was still walking in the same direction at the same pace, and she quickly faded out of view into the dark, but it was almost like she just sort of disappeared. Now, I'll admit that it's 100% possible that we all just got spooked due to the time of the night, but it's something that's always stuck out in my memory to this day. I mean, it was rare to see anyone walking on the side of the road there, and especially so at night. There was really nowhere for her to be going at that hour, besides the McDonald's, I suppose, which was a drive-thru only at that hour. The direction that she was walking from, it had no houses or structures for like several miles, meaning that she would have been walking for at least an hour to be where she was when we saw her. On top of that, not many people even walked near the highway like that due to the rate of accidents that I mentioned earlier. I don't know. Something about this event always stuck out to me. The way that she was walking, the fact that we couldn't remember her face, the way she sort of just disappeared in the darkness like that. It just feels off to me, even all these years later. The only other person to hear about this directly from me is my wife. I told her the story when we first got together in 2021. I was recently reminded of it because we just had a baby at the hospital that I used to work at when all of this was going on in my life. It's the first time that I've been back there since 2020. Now, my ex-wife and I had separated during the pandemic, making divorce and custody of our 3-year-old at the time an absolute nightmare because courts weren't open, everything was telecourt on Zoom calls, and things got dragged on all the time. I had just received a job offer from a new hospital, but because of COVID, it had a start date that was 10 weeks out, so I gave my old hospital a 2-week notice and took 8 weeks off to myself. In that time to myself, I realized how nasty the divorce battle was getting, how expensive it was, how much my ex was also manipulating people around me that I started cutting off a lot of people close to me. I stopped talking to people who weren't my attorney, even my 2 cousins or the woman I was seeing at the time. The gyms weren't open and I couldn't work out. My new job pushed back my start date another 6 weeks due to not having enough appointments to get new hires cleared for work through employee health services, physical exams. So I'd be out of work a total of 3.5 months by this stage. I wasn't on any verge or a mental breakdown or anything, but some things started to close in when I realized how many people I had to disassociate myself with. Bills still coming while my savings were dwindling, attorney fees racking up, and I was missing my son a lot with no court order in line, and until one was in place, I only got him whenever his mum would let me. In trying to pass time and also trying to find some financial gain, I started to frequent the only place that never closed, the casino. I quickly found myself playing there daily for hours on end, and ended up racking up play points getting offers for meal comps and free room stays, but I always went home at the end of the night in anticipation of maybe getting my son the next morning. Most of the time, I'd leave around 2 or 3 in the morning when the table action from Baccarat, my game of choice, would die down. Some days I was in a casino psychosis, I guess you could call it, where I would leave, not cash out any chips because I knew that I was coming back anyway. I'd get some sleep, a little, and then I'd get back up and check my phone to see if I was getting my son for the day, and touch base with my attorney, shower, get back into my car to head back to the casino, 40 minutes away, all while the sounds of the slots were still ringing in my ears from the nights prior. One night I came home at around 1 a.m, and I had to be up early. The woman that I was dating at the time lived 2 hours away in San Jose, California, and I was severely neglecting the relationship, and so we made some plans. 1 a.m. was early for me, and I was pulling up to my house. My porch light wasn't on, but turning into my driveway, my headlights shined in that direction, and that was when I saw a boy, probably around maybe 8 to 10 years old, I would guess, by my door, and I hopped out of the car quickly thinking that he might be in trouble. When I got up to the door, though, there was no one there. I was certain that it was a boy, and I wasn't seeing things from being tired because, I wasn't. I experienced paranormal things when I was younger, but never in this house, so I automatically thought my house may be haunted. And it's the first time that this ghost, or whatever it was showing up now that nobody else stayed there besides me, perhaps. Still though, I checked around the house, inside, sat still waiting to hear anything, any creaks or cabinet doors closing, and eventually I just went to bed. I drove to San Jose the next day and stayed there, and it was then that I learned that it wasn't my house that the boy was staying in because I saw him again while in a whole different city. My ex-girlfriend lived in this type of townhome, I guess. That's 3 stories with the master bedroom being on top. It had a living room, a kitchen in the middle level, garage and front door entryway was on the first floor. We'd ordered DoorDash at the end of the night, and when the food arrived, I looked down outside the window to see the Dasher leaving, so I ran downstairs to grab the food with my car keys in hand, since my car was right out front. I bent down to grab the food and unlocked my car, and held down on the unlock button, accidentally rolling windows down. And that's when I saw someone sitting in my passenger seat. Just grey skin, black eyes and black hair, hardly able to see over the window of the 2018 Camaro. I ran up to the car, and when I did, nobody was in it. I got in to roll my windows back up, and quickly ran back upstairs with the food, not saying anything about what I had just seen. I didn't see him again the next couple of days while staying there, but I got back home and did my routine again, making my way to the casino, and this is when I started seeing the boy more frequently. Whoever he was following me around everywhere. I'd see him at home, in parking lots, in distances behind crowds. He was short, but weirdly, he looked, well, dead. There was one occasion that I saw him, and he didn't even seem to have a face. For 3 weeks, he followed me around, too. I wasn't scared of him, I guess. I felt like so much was going on, and some days I was only caring about hitting on the tables that he sort of annoyed me more than creeped me out. One night, though, I definitely got sleep paralysis, and I could see him in the corner of my room, but his voice was in my ear telling me that he'd help me win, just take him to have fun. I fought it off and got free and eventually fell back asleep. Growing up being raised a Thai Buddhist and having experienced things when I was younger, I knew generally that you aren't supposed to give in to what the spirits want or test them in any way, as things can get much worse. That same following day, I hit a $40,000 run on the baccarat table that happened fairly quickly too. I couldn't bet a single hand wrong. I doubled down every time, in fact. 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000 to 8,000 and so on. It was a huge rush, but I went home and there he was again by the front door. This time grinning ear to ear like he was taking credit for it or something. Anyway, the next day I went again and I got up to about 17,500, betting 2,500 at a time, and I saw the little boy laughing at me in the distance. It was then that I lost everything in 4 hands, trying to recover everything from the first lost hand, and eventually I just left in a rage. I had attorney fees to pay for, and really I could have just used that money on that. I was contemplating deeply grabbing more cash and going back to try and win it back, but I had an argument with my girlfriend from San Jose about not spending enough time together, and it stopped me from going anywhere. The little boy appeared again in the darkness when I was in bed, about to go to sleep that night. And ignoring everything that I had learned growing up, it was that night that I challenged him. Gambling had me double down on him, and I told him that if he was going to be following me around like this, then he's going to be stuck with me, that he's going to be miserable. Do I look like the type of person that has anything to offer you? You're going to starve following me around. And it was at that very moment that I was done yelling at this dead kid. It's like he understood exactly what I said, and clearly it wasn't what he wanted. He let out a huge ear-piercing scream, and honestly it felt like it shook the house. And he just faded away. His eyes were the last thing to go. After that, I never saw him again, and haven't experienced anything paranormal since then too. In the following weeks, the courts started opening back up, in personal litigation and all that, and I got a court order to get my son. Things got into motion towards finalizing the divorce with his mum, and I ended up listing the house for sale for us to split the money instead of buying her out. I moved and I started work at my new hospital and was finally able to focus on working and spending time with my son. I split with my ex-girlfriend that I was dating at the time. Also, it's like everything bad had just gone away all of a sudden and left with that little boy. I never mentioned a word of this to anyone else besides my wife, just because we joked about my divorce and wishing that we had met during the pandemic when people were forced to stay home together. I opened up to her about what kind of year that was for me. I obviously don't have any proof to show that this has actually happened. Maybe that's why I don't really speak about it too, but I have no reason to lie about it, or even draft up this long-winded storyline with so much background information. Looking back, I'm realizing that maybe I was being haunted by something for whatever reason, but when it was happening, it just didn't feel that way. Sure, there were moments I jumped or was startled, but the way that I was reacting to it, it felt like I was being burdened, not haunted, if that makes any sense. In any case, I'm glad that it's all over now. I don't know really why any of this happened. I was under a lot of pressure at the time, so who knows. Maybe it was in my head, but still, the whole thing felt very real to me. And I've never had anything happen like this ever again, or previously, so I don't know. I don't think it was psychosis or anything. Like I said, looking back on it all, I really do believe that I was being haunted. When I was like 6 or 7 years old, I was sleeping in the den of my grandma's house while my parents were having a bonfire outside and drinking. It was definitely sometime after midnight, but I woke up suddenly for some reason and started looking around the room in the dark. It was then that I saw a little person dressed in all black, and he had a little hat and like a little cape on, but then I realized that it looked like a shadow, like it was completely black. He then ran across the room and into the closet, but the closet door was closed, so he ran through the door. I got so freaked out by that I screamed for my mum. She heard me and came inside. I told her what I had seen and she believed me. Apparently my grandma's house was crazy haunted. And now, I'm not sure if it was the same night or a different night, but my mum told me about this years later when I was older. My mum was telling her brother, my uncle, what I saw, and she said that I had seen a midget in all black, and my uncle cuts her off and asks, did it have a newsboy hat and a cape? She said yes, and he says, I've seen him too. He was sitting on the wall behind the avocado tree one night, and he was smoking a cigarette watching me. He said that he had seen the cigarette light up when he was taking a drag, and then he just suddenly disappeared. It was super crazy, and honestly, I don't know what to make of it all these years later. If he was able to smoke a cigarette, is that even a shadow person at all? Was it a demon? It's like it was sentient, maybe. So, what could it have been? This was like 25 years ago now, and the whole thing still troubles me. This happened to me when I was around 9 and my little sister was 3. It was nighttime, around 10 p.m, and I was playing computer games on my desktop that was in my room. My desk faced the wall opposite of my door in my room, and I heard something hit the wall beside me. I turned around and there was nothing there. Now, as a kid, I just figured that I was tripping and got back to playing my game. But then it happened again. I turned around again, but this time when I did, I saw my sister walking down the stairs. Mind you, the stairs were literally right next door to my room. I couldn't see down them from my room, but I could see when someone would go to walk down them. My little sister was so small at the time that our parents would give her one of her big t-shirts to wear when she went to bed sometimes. And when I saw her, I called out to her, but she didn't answer. She just walked down the stairs. Now, I know 100% that I had seen a small figure in an oversized white t-shirt walk down those stairs. So I got up and I went to the stairs, but I didn't see her. I figured that she must have run down, but it was weird because she was scared to go downstairs by herself at night. I quickly ran downstairs to see what she was doing, but all of the lights in the TV were off. The only light on was a little sculpture case that my mum put ornaments in. I checked the kitchen and living room, but she wasn't down there. I ran back upstairs to find her in our parents' bed, asleep. My mum was at work that night and my dad was in the shower. Me and my sister and dad, we were the only three home. As a kid, I just shrugged it off and got back to my game, but now as a 26-year-old man, it honestly scares the heck out of me to think about it. I mean, what the heck was that I saw that night? There is a strange old energy throughout Georgia Piedmont in the foothills of the Appalachians. The geography of the area, that which has not yet been consumed by Atlanta's limitless growth, can be characterized by dense forests, rolling hills, and shallow red clay valleys punctuated by small grassy meadows. Silty rivers and small streams crisscross the landscape, often filling up the valleys to form lakes and marshes. You're never alone in these forests too, which are densely populated with wildlife of all strata. The region also hosts a large human presence, with booming sunbelt suburbs sprawling endlessly into the ancient hills. As there are so many people in a relatively small region, it can feel difficult to escape the hustle and bustle of it all. Well-known trails close to the population centers are often crowded, especially on fall weekends when the plentiful trees bloom with autumn color. I've been around long enough to know what hikes to avoid at certain times of the year, as solitude is one of the most enticing benefits of wilderness to me. Plenty of state and natural forests, as well as expensive county nature preserves, go relatively unnoticed if they're not among the top search results on all trails. My Labrador puppy loves to accompany me on any hike, and after work one day, I loaded him into the cab of my tired old pickup and drove us out to a close-by nature preserve that we frequent. The small gravel parking lot was totally empty when we arrived. The trail that we took led straight from the parking lot and was one of the most popular. It was midsummer, and I knew that there would be at least 90 minutes before sunset, but under the tree cover, the landscape was already beginning to darken. As we got on our way, the roar of cicadas immediately drowned out the soft percussion of our footsteps. After crossing a whitewater creek and proceeding through a thicket of tall pines for not more than 2 miles, the view suddenly opens up to an expansive, untamed meadow. Markings on trees along the right-hand side clearly indicate where the trail resumes on the opposite corner, several hundred yards away. The majority of the meadow slopes down gradually to the left, dotted with occasional dogwoods, and is sliced off sharply by another wall of old-growth pines before the bottom of the hill. Now, although I was familiar with the trail, I suddenly found us cutting swiftly leftward through the tall grass and down the hill toward the grove at the bottom of the meadow. Both my pup and I were drawn with urgency to this off-trail area of the preserve. Soon enough, we were at the trees and taking our first steps into the dim woods. Through the branches ahead, I could see a crumbling red brick chimney standing alone in the brush. It didn't appear to be far away, but as we continued to advance toward it for several minutes, it seemed that, for whatever reason, we just weren't getting any closer. Suddenly, a large black snake stopped us in our tracks, positioning itself as if to block us and staring with a raised head. This is highly unusual behavior for black snakes, which are normally furtive and keep away from people. This slight shock snapped me out of my almost trance-like state, and suddenly, everything felt very wrong. I took it as a sign that we were not welcome in that part of the forest, and no longer wanted to investigate the chimney. It took much longer than I expected to get back into the meadow. At this point, I was drenched in sweat, and my pup was panting hard, whereas not long ago we were enjoying the relatively cool summer evening. The meadow, too, was now dark, and when I checked my watch, I saw that we had been off the trail for nearly an hour, apparently. Also, everything was now completely silent, no more cicada chirping. None of that made sense, but I've had similar encounters throughout the region, where the laws of space and time seem to be somehow suspended in certain areas of the backwoods. I've considered looking for the chimney again when I'm sure to have more daylight, but then I think about the snake's warning and the feeling of existential dread that I felt that evening. I don't know. Perhaps some things are just not meant to be investigated. Of all the unexplainable things that I've witnessed throughout my life, I'm female and in my 30s, I only saw an apparition once, and I am sure that I saw what I think I saw. I was about 10 to 11 years old. My grandma was babysitting my younger sister and I. My sister was 5 or 6. She was watching TV in the living room. My grandma and I were at the kitchen table. Her kitchen window was located directly above her sink, and from where we were sitting, we were facing that window. There is also a sliding glass door to the right side of that window that exits out to a deck, and it was surrounded by a fenced-in yard in a densely populated suburban neighborhood. It couldn't have been any later than 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It was a nice spring day and slightly overcast. One of our favorite things to do was to have tea together, and so she made the best iced tea, and I always wanted it when I visited. We were sitting at the table, chatting and drinking said tea, when out of my peripheral vision, I noticed something appear in the window. I looked up, and clear as day, right in the window looking directly at me, was a man. He was dressed in what looked to me was 1920s attire. He had a tall black top hat on, piercing blue eyes, no facial expression but grey sort of bushy eyebrows, and one of those creepy handlebar moustaches that appeared to be curled with gel or something. Now, I had an active imagination as a kid, and I was in somewhat of a daze as I was looking at him through the window. I didn't feel scared for some reason, but I must have had quite the expression on my face because my grandma gently tapped my arm and said in almost a whisper, not to scare my little sister, "But do you see that too, sweetie?" With that, I looked back at the window, and he was gone. My grandma and I went outside and inspected the deck and yard, but there was nothing. I asked my grandma what she saw in the window, and she told me that it looked like a middle-aged man from the past who she did not recognize. I asked if he had a mustache, and she said yes. I asked what kind of mustache she saw, and she said that it was big and curled. Had my grandmother not been there to validate what I saw in that window that day, I would have gone the rest of my life thinking that I conjured that image up in my mind. But the fact that she saw it too, well, again, I know what I saw. I want to preface this story by stating that I'm a very analytical person. I'm actually a technical business analyst, so my livelihood is to analyze and find reasoning behind every situation. But it's to the point where I just cannot deny that something is living in my family home and it imitates my mother. So I live in Queensland, Australia, and in about 2004, we moved into a very old Queenslander home. Google Queenslander home and you'll see the type of house that I'm talking about. It was a big fixer-upper, with very high ceilings and a beautiful deck that caught the summer breeze perfectly. It was the first house built in the entire street over 150 years ago, and used to be a celery farm. Random, I know. About 15 years ago, my cousin was sleeping over one night. We were very close, and she told me all about her paranormal experiences. For context, she grew up in Indonesia, and her mother was apparently into black magic, so she has seen and experienced a lot of things. "Is there anything in my house?" I asked her. "Yes," she replied. "She sits on the windowsill of your mum's room," she said. "Is it bad?" I asked. I'm not too sure if I wanted to actually hear the answer, to be honest. "Just don't bother it," she said, shutting down the conversation. Fast forward a few years. I was sitting on my bed studying with the door open. I then see my mum walk down the hallway with the washing basket, about to put on a load of laundry. About 5 seconds later, I see her walk down the hallway with the washing basket, going the same direction that she was before. I was baffled at that. I mean, how could she walk the same direction twice? I tried to shake it off, thinking that it must have just been my tired mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was studying and it was pretty late. About a year passes and I had forgotten the spooky incident of my mum walking in the same direction twice. It was a Friday afternoon and I had my best friend over and we were hanging out in the kitchen talking to my mum. Mum was cooking dinner and me and my friend were just chatting away. My brother then appears from his room. "Where's dinner?" he asked. "Still another 30 minutes away," Mum replies. "But you just came into my bedroom and told me that dinner was ready." We all froze, silent. Chills ran up the back of my spine as I remember the incident that happened a year prior. "No, I didn't," Mum responded. Yes you did," my brother exclaimed. "You knocked open my door, walked into my room and told me that dinner was ready." Now, I can vouch for my mum that she definitely didn't do this. After all, I was with her the entire time. My brother shook his head. "Perhaps I'm imagining things?" and then walked back to his room. It was then that I knew that he wasn't imagining things, though. From there as well, things got weird, but only for me. My brother never had another experience after that, and neither did my mum. My placid dog, a big fat golden lab, would jump up from her sleep and growl and bark at the corner of the room. Doors that I closed would open up behind me, and I always felt like something didn't want me there. Fast forward a few years though, and I had moved out of home, and was asked by my mum to dog sit while she went away for the weekend. I did. It was a hot summer night, and I was in the spare bedroom with the air conditioning on freezing cold. Then, at the exact same time, the air conditioning turned off, my phone went to Do Not Disturb, and the bedroom door flung open. I don't mean that the door just creaked open. I mean, it absolutely swung on its hinges, like somebody had pushed it. I jumped up and ran out of the room, called my boyfriend, freaking out. He calmed me down, and for whatever reason, I stayed at the house. As a horror film fanatic, I know that this was a dumb move, but it became time for bed, so I went to take the dog outside to go potty before bringing her back in. She is a stubborn old thing, and so I have to physically go outside and stand in the backyard with her, otherwise she just will not go. Whilst we were outside and the dog was sniffing around trying to find her toilet spot for that evening, I suddenly felt something. I don't know how to describe it because I didn't actually see anything, but I felt something that looked like my mother at the end of the backyard, standing and looking directly at me. I know that sounds really weird, but the feeling was so strong. People will say that it was your mind playing tricks on you, but I swear that it wasn't, because I have never before nor since had a feeling like that before. It was like I was seeing something without actually seeing it. I sort of sensed it, I guess, and it sensed really strong. She was in a nightgown, blonde shoulder-length hair, looking just like my mother, except cold and emotionless and angry. I rushed the dog back inside and I went to bed. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. Whatever it was imitating my mother, it didn't seem to like me. It never showed itself to my mum or brother, but for some reason loved to torment me. That was until recently. You see, I was over at my mum's for dinner, and the topic of ghost stories came up. I brought up all the experience that I'd had at that house and how I found it so strange that Mum never experienced it. Mum looked at me with a blank stare, almost as if she was trying to hold something in. "What is it?" I asked. "Well, the other week, something happened." She began to tell me the story, which finally made her realize that I was telling the truth. Except this time, it imitated somebody else. Mum was with her friend on the balcony, having some afternoon tea or whatever. Where's the bathroom? Her friend asked. Just down the hallway, Mum replied. Her friend then got up to go to the bathroom. From the balcony, you can pretty much see everything from the house as it looks straight down the hallway. Mum looked down, eating her afternoon tea, and when she looked back up, she saw her friend walk out of the toilet and into my mum's bedroom. My mum shouted out her friend's name, and then, "What are you doing?" But there was no response. My mum shouted a bit more, getting up from her seat to go and see why she went into her bedroom. And just as she was about to walk down the hall, there appeared her friend, walking out of the toilet. She quickly darted into her bedroom upon seeing this, but nobody was there. I don't know what this thing is that imitates people in my mum's house, but I know that it's not nice. It's not friendly, and it doesn't want me around. All I can say is that I'm glad I moved out when I did. And I guess my question for all of you guys is, has anyone else experienced anything like this? And if you did you ever get rid of it? So, I had a roommate named Adrian Michaels. We were very close friends, and she needed a place to live, so we moved in together. I was pregnant, and we celebrated every aspect of my pregnancy together. She made an appointment to freeze her eggs because she was in her late 20s, and she didn't believe her eggs would be good by the time that she was ready to have a baby. I'm giving these details so that you can see what situations we found ourselves in. Anyway, a few days after my due date, her service cat alerted me and I was going to be sick. Sure enough, I was, and I went to the doctor just to be safe. For reasons I won't get into, they illegally held me there and coerced me into having an unnecessary C-section, which was my greatest fear. 3 weeks later, I was in a spiral of depression and unable to do my usual tasks. I usually cooked and cleaned for her. She also spiraled into her ED and lost a lot of weight very quickly, and she quit exercising as well. Another thing I won't go into a lot of detail is that she had a very bad day that day, and unfortunately, that night she died. So after that, we had to move. Our first day looking, we found a 2-bedroom house on the lake for $750 a month. Similar houses were going for like $1,400 plus at the time, so we felt extremely blessed. We were the only applicants, and the owner said that his wife couldn't handle living in the house but wouldn't explain why. So we moved in, and within a few days, the place started feeling unsafe. We felt like we were being watched, and the place really obviously wasn't under surveillance, but it felt like a weird spiritual thing almost. I've always been kind of sensitive, I guess, and here was definitely no exception. It started pretty benign, I guess, like feeling like I wasn't alone in the kitchen or the laundry room, and that was fine. I mean, it didn't bother me too much. We just figured that maybe Adrian was stopping by. I would talk to her sometimes and tell her that I'd miss her, but it was around then that the dreams started. Pretty standard dreams usually. Feeling like my daughter was in danger, feeling like I was falling, seeing shadows in my lucid dreams, but I had a dream about Adrian, and she was sitting drinking tea, and after a tearful reunion, she told me that it wasn't safe to be where she was and she had to leave, and something kept lurking in the shadows. She told me not to look for it because it's going to cause me even greater pain. When I woke up, my baby was screaming in her crib, and there were really huge ants just all over the place. She'd been bitten a few times as well, but it was winter and there were no ants in the house usually that we knew of. I mean, we kept the place really clean. We put out some ant poison though, and we never figured out where they came from, and we never really saw them again after that too. They just seemed to vanish. Also, my chinchillas would bark a lot when they'd normally been quiet before. Soon after this as well, I was cleaning and I found what looked like a bloody handprint in the closet. I took photos, but they were on my old computer, which I can't turn on anymore. But the handprint was very clearly that of a child. When we moved in, I put all of Adrian's stuff in the spare room and I never went in there. Her parents took only her photos and her cat, so we had the rest of her life in this room. I was organizing in the room when I opened the closet and saw an attic bolted shut and painted over. I could see that it hadn't been opened since it had been repainted, but in the back corner of the closet was a tiny chair built in. I got spooked immediately by something falling off of the table in the other room, so I went out and took care of that, shut the door, and I didn't go back in there. And that night was the first night that I saw something. My husband was in the bedroom changing the baby and we were talking. The kitchen has a view into the laundry room and I saw him in there and was talking to him. I went into the bedroom to put something away to find that he was actually in there. I was extremely unsettled by this. I mean, I'd never seen anything pretend to be someone that I loved. After this experience, though, I had my very religious mother go through with some church friends and bless the place. It still felt like I was being watched, though, but I was able to ignore it now for the most part. By the time that my baby started walking, I spiraled again into depression. I always kept the blinds closed and I practically lived in the dark in those days. Seldom did I even have the TV on, and my husband worked 12-hour shifts 5 days a week to keep up with the bills and things. My mum was over a lot, but I quit cleaning and I can't remember a lot of it, honestly. I felt immense guilt that my roommate died because I couldn't be better for her, which rationally I know isn't correct, but I was really messed up during this time is what I'm getting at. Anyway, it was deep winter when I felt this extreme chill, like all the doors were suddenly open at once. My scented candles flickered and almost went out, but all of a sudden I just couldn't move. I was holding my sleeping baby and out of the corner of my eye I saw something crawling on the floor. It was large too, like a man's size, but the proportions were off and the arms were way too long. It was walking towards us and everything in me was screaming not to look at it. I could see it coming towards me, but the entryway door opened and my husband came home early to surprise me with dinner. At that, I quickly shot around, but when I did, nothing was there. I told him about it later when I could think about it, but I saw the figure several more times, but there was just nothing that we could do. I mean, at least it didn't end for a few more months, so we just sucked it up and dealt with the fear. Eventually, I looked into the history of the house, and one of the people who lived there was the police chief who was jailed for abusing his daughter, apparently. It was a trap house at one point as well, and someone had been killed nearby. There's probably a lot of experiences that I had in that house that I shut out of my mind, but this is everything that really stands out to me, things that I'll never forget. But the house just felt suffocating at times and like I was being pushed out. The landlord had a second house available for only $450 a month, so we moved out the day after we found out about the other rental place. No one stays living there very long. Most people have stayed for about 4 months before everyone always leaves. Since the events of this story, though, my life has improved incredibly. I haven't had a single bout of depression since living there, and I have 3 children who are all very happy and healthy. My oldest sees ghosts and has past life memories that she tells me about, but I'll save those for another time. I've been meaning to share this for over 6 years now, and if you've listened to all of it, then thank you. I appreciate getting it off my chest because it's been a very, very long journey. I work at an oil refinery or chemical plant in the southern US. I won't give the company name for obvious reasons, but I work primarily around the rail yard, but we do handle business throughout the whole eastern portion of the plant. So about a month ago, I will not give the exact date as you'll be able to find my place of work pretty quickly. I had completed my work for the night and had taken the company truck to a part of the refinery that I was more likely to go unnoticed by my supervisor should they be driving around. This has been my go-to spot to hide from the boss and sleep away the remainder of my shift for the past 2 years or so that I've worked here. This part of the refinery, where there had been a relatively localized explosion that tragically took the life of a woman that had been employed directly by the owners of the refinery for about 5 years. She was attempting to fire up burners to restore power to the refinery during an emergency power outage. This took place around 10 years before, on the same day and round about the same time in the morning. The area of the plant where this happened is still taped off and shut down to this day. Anyway, on this night, while sitting in the truck, it had begun to rain very heavily. We had been in a relatively severe drought for the past several months, so the poor weather was actually welcomed by all, especially with the notice the plant had sent over the radio stating that there was lightning in the area and to stop work and find the nearest substantial shelter. I was watching a movie on my phone and finding it hard to stay awake with the sound of the heavy rain on the roof of the truck. Sometime in the very early morning hours though, although I can't be exactly sure on the time, I was awoken from my half-sleep by a huge orange glow that completely engulfed me. It was so intense that I couldn't open my eyes past a squint due to the brightness. I could only describe it as being very similar to staring directly into the sun. I immediately recognized that I was in the middle of an explosion. However, there was absolutely no sound, no heat, and no fear. For a moment, I questioned if I was still alive, but as the orange glow died down, I saw a woman completely engulfed in flames, running for about 5 or 6 steps before falling to the ground. Since that day, 10 years ago, there have been a number of pipes installed that run horizontally just above the ground in front of the furnace and meant to bypass it. And whoever this woman was, she ran straight through them. I mean, she ran straight through them like they weren't even there. Then, just as soon as I saw it, it all just disappeared. The fire was gone, she was gone, the whole space was just as empty as before, and I was back to sitting alone in a truck, listening to the rain. I obviously couldn't believe what I had just seen. I, like everyone else at that plant, was familiar with what had happened on that day, and I knew exactly what I had just witnessed. I just couldn't wrap my head around how I had witnessed an event that happened a full decade in the past. I drove back to our shop where I promptly clocked out and went out to my personal truck. I sat there for at least half an hour trying to come to terms with what I had just witnessed. After the initial shock wore off, I felt very indifferent about it, I guess. It didn't freak me out or anything. What I saw was just, I guess, very matter-of-fact. Even still, though, I kept the story to myself because I figured that there was very little benefit to telling anyone. And an event like this is obviously hard to forget, especially in the only 3 or so weeks since it happened, but I have tried not to dwell on it too much because I know that I'll drive myself crazy trying to comprehend exactly why I was somehow able to witness such a well-known and tragic event from like 10 years in the past. But then, last night, it happened again. We have a very small loading dock that sits in the back of the rail yard and hasn't been manned or used in years. Last night the weather was very foggy, to the point that you could only see lights from the refinery for about 100 yards, and could only see objects for maybe 25. I was driving the work truck down to a storage tank that we have, and talking on the phone to my wife about the trip that she had taken to visit her mum in the next state over. As I turned the corner near the rack, my phone dropped the call. I didn't think too much of it because service can be spotty in parts of the refinery, although this area usually has a pretty strong signal. Nevertheless, I figured that I would just call her back after I had arrived at my destination. I happened to look to my left to glance at the rack, I never had the opportunity to use it, and it had different equipment than I'm used to using. I have to look at it when I pass in an attempt to picture how it all worked. It sort of sits about 30 feet from the road, so it's close enough that I was able to still make out the details pretty well. As I looked over, I saw two men up there. They were wearing the old company uniform and seemed to be hooking up a large white rail car. These white cars are uncommon in our yard, but not unheard of. However, if we had one staged in this area, there is absolutely no way that I would know about it. Nor is there any way that I would not have seen it any of the other 10 or so times that I had passed that area during that day. I could make out their faces well enough to know that neither of the men were anyone that currently works here. I also noticed the rack didn't look nearly as rusty and neglected as it usually does. It still had paint on it and didn't look overgrown or abandoned at all. That being said, everything was a little blurry and, instead of being in the fog, it was more like they were in the fog, I guess, or were the fog. They were sort of part of it almost. Then, as I reached the next turn, they were just gone. The people were gone, the large white car was gone, the rack was back to its rusty normal self. Interestingly, the fog started clearing up very shortly after this as well, although I can't say that they were really connected. Once again, this took me a minute to process, but I wasn't really freaked out or anything. I actually just thought that it was really cool that I got to sort of witness this time slip 2 times now. I asked a coworker that has been here nearly as long as I have been alive when the uniforms changed, and he said that it was sometime during 2015. I don't know if I also saw them 10 years in the past or if it was a different, more random amount of time. Our company had been here since the 60s, so there really is no telling. But one thing that I did notice is that both events seemed to move slower than normal time. Not slow motion, just a little slower than normal, I guess. I don't know if this was actually time moving slower or if my brain was just taking longer to process what I was seeing. These are the only times in my life that I've never experienced anything like this. I don't know if it was something to do with the plant, the area, or me. I will say, though, that the city where this took place is where one of the most well-documented UFO sightings or abductions took place. Maybe this is just a place where odd things happen. Who knows? Anyway, I'm sorry if my thoughts are a little bit jumbled here. Reliving this while sharing it has proven to make it difficult to keep my mind on track. I would love to hear of anyone else that has had similar experiences to this, though. I am really desperate to know I'm not the only one that has seen something like this, because if you've ever experienced something like it, then you know that it is something else. This takes place in the rural farmland of southeastern United States. For those from around the area, you will know that there really isn't much around except for old farmhouses, fields, and the occasional subdivision. When I was around 17 or 18, I was dating a girl who went to the same high school as me. Being teenagers, we needed a place to be alone, and what better than the front seat of my F-150. Often, it was hard to find a place to park that was away from the road and was far enough away from everybody else. One evening, as the sun was getting ready to set, I remembered an abandoned house with a long driveway and a tobacco barn off some old back road with no other houses around. I had been there before and explored the property. The house's roof had been abandoned long ago and currently had been used to store lumber, apparently. The house had no doors or windows left, and the rest of the property was clearly in disrepair and didn't appear to be used at all. I figured this long-forgotten property would make a good spot, so I drove my truck up into the driveway, far away from prying eyes. I put my truck in park, lifted up my center console, and put on the radio. As my girlfriend and I were talking, she suddenly stops with her eyes glued to the rearview mirror and says, I think somebody is there. I initially blew her off as I was fairly confident that nobody was around for miles, but I glanced in my rear view to see a very beat-up looking Ford truck had pulled directly behind mine, and the door instantly flew open. Out jumped a tall, dirty-looking man, holding what appeared to be a gun with a weathered wooden stock. As I put my window down, the man advances yelling all types of obscenities from the side of my truck. As he walks up, I hear the distinct sound of the safety clicking off of an older rifle. I froze as the world stopped around me. I had never been held at gunpoint before. As soon as the shock wore off, I threw my hands up and I see the man had his sights aimed on me through the rear window of my truck. I looked over to my girlfriend, who was frozen in shock and somewhat cowered into the passenger door. I remember feeling helpless and reaching for my pistol I usually had between the seats, which I quickly realized that I had left at home. This was probably a blessing in disguise, as the strange man was clearly belligerent and under the influence of something, and I'm sure that him seeing my pistol would have just sent him more over the edge. As my hands are up and my girlfriend is shaking in fear, I eventually mutter out, "What's going on, sir?" The man, through rotten and missing teeth, shouts, "You come out here tearing up my field and ruining my crops?" He clearly had mistaken me for some of the ATV riders around the area who would often wander on the private property and tear up the land like that. Looking at the man, he didn't look like any of the farmers that I had known around the area, having lived here 15 years at this point. I was pretty familiar with the local farmers. This supposed farmer looked maybe in his early 30s and looked to me more like a junkie that I would see downtown. I replied to the man that I had never been here before, nor was I responsible for destroying his crops, trying desperately to defuse the situation. He wanted to hear none of it though and continued to mutter, while still holding me at gunpoint. I waited for a break in his incoherent babbling to apologize profusely and say, "Sir, if I had seen a no trespassing sign, I wouldn't have dared step foot on the property." The man advanced from behind my truck to open my window to yell, "Didn't you see the sign?" He didn't believe me. As I studied him, he continued to grip the rifle tighter and mumbled to himself. I apologized some more and offered to leave when I noticed that he has me completely blocked in at this point, which means that there was nowhere to go. As soon as I mentioned leaving, he perked up and dropped the rifle ever so slightly, putting us out of immediate danger. My fight or flight briefly chose fight, but I knew that there was no way to jump out of the truck and get him before he could shoot. Time seemed to slow, and I felt like the silence that ensued lasted hours. He started to yell obscenities again, but started to walk back to his truck. As he passes my rear bumper, my girlfriend and I exchanged glances. I had never seen a fear like that in somebody's eyes before, let alone somebody that I loved. I knew that I had to do whatever I could to get away from this unhinged stranger, so I fired up my truck and put it in reverse as he does the same. The beat-up Ford backed up into the road and stopped, waiting for me to exit. I backed into the road as well, my eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. As soon as there was enough space, I threw that truck into drive and stomped the gas pedal down as far as I could go. My tires squealed and the truck roared as it ran through the gears. I was familiar with the roads and was confident that I could outrun him if I needed to, as his truck looked like it was on its last leg, to be honest. As the speedometer flew past 60, I could see the man following us, but enough distance from my truck that it would be hard to put a hole in my tailgate. My girlfriend is calming down at this point and is trying to rationalize what had just happened to us. I drove and drove for several miles, constantly looking behind to see if he was following. I briefly remember doing over 100 miles an hour at some point. The mood in the cab changed to utter disbelief as we talk about how crazy the supposed farmer looked and awkwardly laughing off our near deaths. I never saw the man again after that, and I never did return to that abandoned house, except for the next day to leave him some ruts in the front yard of the rundown property. Looking back, I haven't the slightest idea as to how the man knew that we were there, as we weren't visible from the road, nor were we followed. I personally think that he was just some tweaker, as I knew most of all the farmers in the area, and being in a small town like that, you know pretty much everyone. I had never seen this man in my entire life, nor have I seen him since. I certainly was in the wrong being on private property, I'll admit that, and had heard horror stories of people running from crazed farmers as bullets flew over their heads. However, a couple of kids parked up in what was clearly a forgotten property, several hundred yards from the nearest field, shouldn't have warranted a firearm pointed at me and my girlfriend, who was sitting in a clean truck that obviously hadn't been tearing up any fields. Coming from a farming family and being close with farmers in the area, the last thing that you would catch me doing is tearing up somebody's livelihood. Regardless, I put my girlfriend's and my life at stake just to park up somewhere and fool around a bit. But trust me though, I never made that mistake again. For context, I'm a highly skeptical but no stranger to the paranormal. I'm the type that believes that demons exist, but most ghost stories are overreactions of easily explained phenomena or simply hoaxes. About 3 months ago, I had just started working security for a hotel that was built back in the 1920s by a major hotel chain that has changed hands multiple times and is now owned by one of the biggest hotel chains. I won't say which it is though, so that I don't get sued or anything, but from what I've been told, paranormal activity is not a common occurrence in the hotel, but some years back, the Make-A-Wish Foundation started sending some children here because it's a major resort at one of the most popular beaches on the East Coast, so why wouldn't they, right? However, the hotel was not informed of this and didn't realize what was happening until several children died in their rooms over the course of a few weeks. And supposedly on quiet nights, you can hear children playing with a ball in the Northern Tower ballrooms at night. For years, guests complained of children playing ball loudly next to their rooms, even when security would check that there would be nobody there. This has not happened in a while, mind you, but going into this story, you should understand that my opinion on the cause of what I've seen may be warped by being told this story. Now, every shift that we do a floor check, especially on night shifts when I work. At first, I never noticed anything strange. I got a little creeped out by the quiet of the floors at night, but nothing supernatural by any means. The hotel has 2 separate towers separated by a restaurant and shopping area that connects them. About a month into the job, and suddenly I started feeling like something was following me on the floor checks, especially in the South Tower, which is the biggest and tallest, and where I understand most jumpers choose because of all the rooms facing the ocean, having a sliding glass door with a short rail in front of it as well. And, well, you can put the rest together from there, right? Anyway, it got really bad in October. Maybe the spooky season had an effect on me, but this feeling of being watched and followed just never really went away. As the weeks have gone on, I started seeing distorted faces in windows as I passed by, to the point that I no longer look at them. The floor pattern sometimes reflects on the glass, and the mind could easily make a face with the pattern, I know that, but some of these faces were up further on the glass where this really shouldn't have been possible. When I focus up there, I can almost hear whispers in the back of my mind, urging me to, finish myself for the mistakes that I've made, or even telling me insecurities I have about myself. I've really never told any of those things to anyone, too. In the last few weeks, some strange physical and auditory phenomena have occurred as well. So part of what we do on floor checks is close doors that we find open, and some of the doors lately have been more difficult to close. One in particular I had to use all my strength to slam shut. The ice machines, too, on each floor sometimes make a sort of banging noise while in operation, so I usually attribute any noise that I hear from the vending area to that, but sometimes it almost just sounded like someone was rummaging in the garbage cans. And when I would go to investigate, I'll hold my keys so they wouldn't jingle in case it was a person. And as soon as I do, the rummaging noise always will stop. On a couple of occasions, I felt what I can only describe as hands touching me while closing certain doors. Sometimes it's just a tickle, and other times a sort of brush against the back of my hand, and even a feeling like someone on the other side of the door is pulling it in the opposite direction against me. And because of all this, I now dread the floor checks, especially after 3 a.m. I'm not trying to make this seem scarier than it is, but these things intensify the closer that it gets to that hour for whatever reason. Whatever they aren't friendly, and I think that they know that I can sense them. They really don't like that I can sense them too. Like some nights, that watched and followed feeling is more like a burning hatred directed towards my existence, like being stalked by an enemy or a predator. I'm pretty religious too, and whenever these things happen, I always pray to God, and when I do, it usually goes away, or whatever it is. The scariest thing, though, is the last time it was that intense that I heard something growl next to my ear. I've never been hurt by them, mind you, so my assumption is that they can't actually hurt anyone physically, but they try to communicate often, and they want their presences acknowledged. Almost as though there's a power that comes from it. My grandmother told me once that demons truly have no power. They're only capable of whatever we believe them to be capable of. So I guess my mounting fear is feeding them, whatever they are. Now, I know that my experiences could just be me seeing things or looking too much into something completely explainable. I don't know, but this is just what I've seen and heard. Whatever it is that's haunting me at night, my co-workers don't know about it, or at least they aren't telling anyone, like I don't too. Maybe I'm just crazy and seeing things, but if that's the case, well, why am I not having any other signs of manic episodes or psychosis or something? And more importantly, why am I only seeing things in that one part of the building? I had something weird happen when I left work today at around 4 a.m. So, there's one stretch of road that I take home that's usually especially devoid of people at that time of night. It's a 4-lane road with a turning lane down the middle. All that's on this road is a small airport on one side and essentially a swamp on the other. So I turn onto this road, driving like normal, fully paying attention because sometimes deer like to jump out around there. It's completely empty, no other cars in sight, totally straight road with no curves, and in the best way that I can describe it, a man just materialized out of thin air, walking in the center turning lane about 10 feet ahead of me. Now, there is no way on earth that I wouldn't have seen him sooner. I mean, with my absurdly bright headlights and absolutely nothing else around, it would have been impossible to miss him. I didn't get a great look at him since he showed up so suddenly, and by the time that I even registered all of that in my brain, I was already flying past him. All I could tell was that it looked like a middle-aged or older black man with a red jacket on, and he had maybe one of those wheeled suitcases or bag things that he was kind of dragging behind him. I hit the brakes and was looking for him in my mirrors because he was very, very close to my car, and I was scared that I'd hit him or something. But I suddenly didn't see anything or anyone at all behind me. As fast as he appeared, he was gone. I ended up pulling a U-turn because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind. Keep in mind, there's absolutely nowhere for this guy to have gone in the 30 seconds that it took for me to slow down and turn around like that. On one side of the road, there's a fence around the airport runways, and on the other is an empty gravel lot and a ditch. And I mean, There was just nowhere that this man couldn't have gone that quickly where I wouldn't have seen him. Anyway, either I lost my mind that night, as I first thought, or down that road, there's a ghost hitchhiker. This happened a couple of weeks ago. I don't have any pictures or video or anything, just the story that happened to me. And now I think that there's a demon following me wherever I go. So if anybody has any advice to give me, then please do give it. Alright. So my room has a layout in such a way where when I lay down and I look at the end of my bed, I can also see the doorway, which leads into a dark hallway with a ceiling at 6 to 7 feet, which is important. I was home alone on an average Tuesday night. My family was out shopping while I was staying home. I usually stay downstairs and watch TV to pass the time, but at around 7 o'clock, yes, my family shops pretty late, it was getting dark and I was pretty bored, so I decided to head upstairs and take a nap. But when I passed by the slightly abandoned room across from mine, I got a weird feeling like somebody was watching me. I ignored it, thinking that it was either my 2 cats or my dog, as they like to play in there a lot, plus the litter box was in there as well. So I went into my room and turned the lights off, plopped on my bed and fell asleep. I didn't have any nightmares or weird dreams or anything, but I did wake up in a weird cold sweat. It seemed like I was scared, and that feeling from before was way stronger now. I looked at my TV, which was still on. I wasn't surprised because I left it on for a bit of light, but it doesn't cast light into the hallway, and so I decided to play on my 3DS for a bit. But then, suddenly, I heard something. I don't really remember what the sound was, but I remember hearing something, and I looked into the hallway, and when I did, I froze. Because there, in the hallway, was a really tall girl with a hat on. The girl was crouched. She had really long hair. I couldn't see her face, but she had a dress or kimono on and also a hat. I wanted to hide under the covers, but she could have moved if I wasn't looking at her. But soon after watching her for quite some time, she then went downstairs. I grabbed a baseball bat and ran into the bathroom, which was the only room in the house with a lock, and I called my family. They had to do a lot of grocery shopping and were also pretty far away, so they told me to call 911. I called the police and they eventually arrived and checked my house out, but there was no sign of forced entry and nobody anywhere. My mother had actually put up some cameras around the house, and when my family checked the footage, the only motion caught was me running to the bathroom. I felt scared walking to the bus stop alone after that. I also felt that thing's presence again following me, the same feeling that I woke up in a cold sweat with. Right now, I don't know what to do or what to think of any of this. I've finally decided to share this story in the hopes that someone out there might be able to help me. When I was young, I grew up on the outskirts of a small town in the Midwest, close to the Great Lakes. The town had a population of about 8,000 at the time and was established in 1833. We lived well outside of town, in an area that was mostly either forest or farmland. There was a small trailer park fairly close on the other side of the railroad tracks, built on a sort of raised mound, so high that you couldn't even see the trailer park from the second floor of our house. But to give you an idea of just how remote we were, the half of a mile stretch in the other direction only had 3 other houses total, and only on one side of the road as well. After that, there was a 2.5 stretch of pretty much nothing but trees or crops before you reached the town proper. At that time, I would have called the farmhouse that we lived in a mansion, but I was very small. We lived there for about 5 years, moving in at about the time that I just entered kindergarten. In retrospect, and looking at it on Google Street View now, it was a fairly small farmhouse, probably built in the early 1900s. While this isn't directly related to the events that I'll later tell you, it occurs to me that it might be relevant, so I'm going to include it. So we owned 6 acres of land, and even then I knew I was fortunate to have so much room to explore and play in. The property was much longer than it was wide too. The house sat fairly close to the road, and the mass of the land that had been cleared I now assumed to be used as farmland for crops. There was also a ring of trees around the perimeter, and a well-worn walking path adjacent to that ring of trees. Outside of a very small grove of apple trees directly next to the house, towards the front of the property, the rest of the land was an empty field full of just tall weeds. So, while I spent most of my time playing in and exploring the closest half of the property, I would never really go back in the back acres alone. The stretch of the trees to the north didn't bother me, nor did the patch of trees in thick forest to the northwest. The patch to the southwest, however, for whatever reason, just terrified me. I would never go anywhere near it alone, and even if I ventured that far with friends or adults, it made me extremely uncomfortable being near that forested sort of corner there. I occasionally still have nightmares about that patch, and for whatever reason, it just freaked me out. Closer to the house, right at the start of the path to the back acres, was a massive woodpile that I spent a good deal of my time playing in. It was easily 5 feet tall, if not 6 feet, as tall as, if not taller than an adult, and I'm pretty sure larger than our house as well. It was composed of irregular-shaped planks that were made by cutting the slightly rounded edges off of a tree. I'm no woodcutter by any means, nor do I know the process, but it always hit me as odd that that much timber was just left behind like that. While the planks were too rounded and irregular in shape to be used for construction, that much I could see. It seemed like a lot of timber that could have been ground up to make particle board or something. I assumed the woodpile was the byproduct of clearing the land for farmland or whatever. Again, I'm no woodcutter, but I will mention that there were no tree trucks to be seen, nor were there any stumps left in the woodpile. They obviously must have been pulled up in the clearing process, but no idea what happened to them or why they were hauled off while the irregular planks were left to rot like that. I can only assume that this mini sort of logging operation had happened a number of years before, probably even decades. The planks were extremely old, whatever the case, and weathered from the elements and very, very brittle. Even though many had sections as thick as 2x4s, they were prone to breaking under the weight of my small frame, and if I put my mind to it, I was capable of breaking them in half with my 5 to 10-year-old strength. Now, I only bring all of this up to establish that the land was not being used for what it was intended to be. In fact, pulling it up on Google Maps, to this day, those 6 acres are still not used for farming, even though nearly all of the surrounding plots now are. The house, though, was completely square. On the bottom floor, half was divided between a dining room and a front room. The other half split between a master bedroom, with remaining space divided between the kitchen and the 2 flights of stairs. One of which led down to an entryway, which included another flight of stairs down to the basement, and the other leading upstairs. I don't think it was ever remodeled. I think the upstairs was designed to basically be a livable attic. You went up half a flight of stairs to a small landing, then had to turn 180 degrees to another half a flight of stairs that led up to a sort of long alcove. From the alcove, you had 2 doors on either side, one to a small bedroom and one to a slightly large L-shaped bedroom. Both bedrooms were equipped with 2 insanely large walk-in closet storage areas. They sloped due to the roof, but they were large enough that my older brother used one as his bedroom, so he had enough space for couches in his bedroom, proper to hang out with his friends and all that. The slightly larger bedroom, that eventually became mine, was large enough to fit 2 double beds in comfortably, plus a large chest of drawers and plenty of floor space to play in. Closets are scary when you're a kid. Large ones even more so. Mine was large enough to fit every conceivable monster my mind could imagine in it. More than enough room for Dracula, a wolfman, the boogeyman, and plenty of room for a Bigfoot or two. My parents, they weren't much for the mollycoddling, and I was expected to go to bed by myself every night. Now, there was a small window on the stairway landing that allowed some light from the yard security light, but when you made that 180 turn, you were staring at a flight of stairs leading up to the pitch darkness where the next light switch could be found. I'm not too proud to admit it, but most nights I made that ascent crying in fear. I also have a large family, but my siblings were all much older, and every year saw another one striking out on their own, and the number of those of us dwelling there getting consistently smaller. One might come back to visit or stay briefly when times were tough, but we went from like 6 when we first moved in to eventually 2 to 4. My father traveled for work, and my older teenager brother spent most of his time out running around. So, by the time that I was 9, most nights it was just me and my mum. Putting this as politely as I can as well, my closest brother was much older than me, a high school jock and, well, kind of an idiot. Even for brothers, I can't say our relationship was good at that point. Most of our interactions went between him ignoring me to tormenting me for his own amusement. I tended to avoid him as much as possible because our time spent together was never enjoyable and usually ended with me crying and our mum screaming, "Leave your brother alone." Now, honestly, I still have almost no idea when this happened. I couldn't tell you what season, and only slightly comfortable in guessing it was probably about the time I was 8, maybe barely after I turned 9 years old. The only thing that I can say for certain is that my father was away on business at the time, and while I'd shared my bedroom with my older sister for the first few years, she'd moved out and I had the bedroom to myself. Now, old houses creak. They creak and moan as they settle. Most nights I'd lay in bed terrified, listening to these sounds trying to convince myself that it wasn't a monster coming to get me. Eventually a train would pass by, and the motion of it shaking the house would always put me to sleep, which is a bit weird, right? So I assume it was a night like any other. If I'd seen a scary movie or read a horror story, I would walk up the stairs in fear and lay in bed listening to every small noise, wondering what it was until a train rocked me to sleep. Barring a nightmare, I almost never woke up in the middle of the night, usually sleeping until the sun came up or my mum woke me up, whichever came first. I didn't have an alarm clock, and I have no memory of there ever being a clock in that room. Total stab in the dark, but sometime after midnight, I was awoken to a sound outside of my bedroom door, in that little alcove that I'd mentioned before. I'd have to say that I was a fairly sound sleeper back then, because I don't ever remember being woken up by my brother coming home, or any other sound for that matter. But for whatever reason, this time, I was woken up by a very slow, very long creak of the floorboards. The first immediate thought was that it was the house settling, and I turned over to go back to sleep, but this time it didn't stop. There were no sound of footsteps, and each creak just sort of took forever. I wasn't actually scared at first, just sort of curious, trying to figure out what it was. But then there was way more noise than the house would make. But if it was someone out there, they were moving just insanely slow. No sound of footfall. If there was someone, they'd just about have to be barefooted or in socks maybe. Just the slow sound of one floorboard groaning in protest of pressure, followed painfully slowly by another floorboard groaning in relief as pressure was removed. At that, I sat up in bed, just listening and arguing with myself. Something has to be there. There's no way anyone is there though. It must be the house making noises. It was so slow that it wasn't even scaring me, I guess. I was just listening to it intently. It went on forever as well, easily 20 or more minutes. long enough that eventually I was convinced that it sounded nothing like maybe my brother creeping home late and trying not to wake anyone up, or even someone breaking in and trying to steal things in the dark without making a sound. It seemed very much like the sound of something, though, pacing very slowly back and forth directly in front of my door. The noise would very slowly move left for a while, and then oh so slowly move back in the opposite direction, like it had no destination in mind. Eventually I was convinced, okay, this is absolutely not my imagination. Someone has to be there, and I suspected my brother was trying to scare me or whatever. I went to call his name and found my voice frozen in my throat. My mother was sleeping directly below me and could absolutely hear me if I screamed, and if it was my brother pranking me, yelling would definitely put an end to it. But I don't know, I've just never felt such terror in my life at just the thought of yelling. At that age, yelling chases everything bad away and brings your mother to your rescue, but all I felt was pure dread at the thought of releasing a scream. And then I heard the sound of the doorknob moving, and any doubt that I wasn't alone was immediately erased. I dove under the covers and balled myself up. Just like the creaking, the sound at the door was painfully slow, like a 3-year-old trying to open a door, unable to get a good grip. I could hear it turning slightly, then stopping, an attempt at turning and then release again, just forever as well. I had a mental image of my brother in a sheet trying to scare me, but even at the time, it just seemed so weird. I mean, why was he doing it anyway? Like, I could see him pretending a few minutes, wandering in the alcove, moaning like a ghost at the top of his lungs until he was sure that I was awake, then jumping on the bed to make me cry and laugh at me. But this style of dramatics seemed unnecessary and really unlike him. After easily a dozen clumsy attempts, the doorknob was finally turned enough to open the door, just barely. I could now hear the door barely moving away from the frame, not nearly far enough for anything to fit through, and now came the sound of something pushing on the door without enough force to open it. The door would sort of creak slightly, open a bit, then fall backwards to a near closed position over and over again. And like everything else up to this point, whatever it was, it took forever. Me shaking under the blanket the whole time, mind you. Even allowing for a child's perception of time, I can say with confidence that we were at easily the 30-minute mark at this point, probably much, much longer. Minimum of 30 minutes from the first time that I heard the creaking of the floorboards outside of my room, to the time that the door was finally pushed with enough force to finally swing completely open. And that was when the groaning started. Let me stress that this was not the high-pitched, ooh, sort of stereotypical look at me pretending to be a ghost moaning sound. This was sporadic, an elderly person trying to get out of bed sort of groaning. When the door opened, I was expecting or hoping for the grand finale of my brother running around, making ghost noises at the top of his lungs. But what I got was a continuation of the slow creeping on floorboards towards my bed, now accompanied by what I can only describe as a low groan. Like everything else so far as well, it was insanely stretched out and was just painful waiting for what was going to happen next. By this point, I was completely balled into the fetal position, trying my best not even to cry or breathe, terrified to make even the slightest sound. Spoiler too, this went on for hours. I'm finally aware time moves slower for kids, but this would extend until just shy of dawn. So even if it started as late as 3 in the morning during the summer, when nights are shortest, and I'm pretty sure it didn't happen in the summer, I don't remember feeling overheated under the blankets or anything. We're still looking at least 2 or 3 hours minimum. In any case, the entity, or whatever it was, circles the bed in what felt like forever, and somewhere I guess about an hour in, it began touching me. I could feel a barely there brush that would eventually really slowly become a very light poke. At this point, I was absolutely petrified. I lay there feeling this for an hour at least, and somewhere before dawn, all of a sudden, everything just stopped. While I allow for my eventually falling asleep, I just cannot imagine sleep taking me when I was so frozen with fear and quivering violently, and I don't remember falling asleep either. Whatever it was, it just stopped. The touching and poking came at a snail's pace, and when I went 5 minutes without being touched, it honestly felt like it was just looming over me. I never did hear the sound of leaving. No slow departure, no creaking of floorboards, nothing. It just stopped. I waited until the room was completely illuminated, not even feeling safe to come out from under the covers when I could tell the sun was breaking, and scrambled down the stairs as quickly as I could to tell my mum exactly what happened. I'm fairly certain that it was a Sunday morning when this happened as well. Didn't have to go to school that day and wasn't worried about watching cartoons or whatever, and started babbling to my mum about seeing a ghost. She was irritated. She didn't get a lot of days to sleep in and wasn't willing to give up her extra sleep for my imagination. She wasn't interested in hearing about it, so I caught a few hours of sleep in her bed with her at that point. For years, I'd tell all of my friends about the night that I saw a ghost, but as I got older, I realized that it was probably just my older brother playing a trick on me. Now, my brother is still a bit of a jerk, and that's just his way, I guess. When I reached adulthood, we got closer and formed a much stronger bond. He's certainly got his own way of doing things, but he tried to be a big better brother after I hit my teens than he'd ever did when I was a kid. But he still revels in the various pranks that he pulled on me. He very frequently feels a need to remind me that at one point he held all the cards. If I playfully or sometimes resentfully bring up some of the terrible things that he did, he'll gloat about it with a big grin, as if remembering better days. So, one holiday when I'd hit my 30s, I stayed late after the family dinner, and it was just the two of us drinking coffee and talking. He, as always, brought up something that he did to me when I was young, tricking me into eating dog food when I was 3, I think, making me lick a 9-volt battery, tricking me into thinking on accident meant intentionally, so it was harder to snitch on him. Take your pick. It's a bit of a long list, but I realized that we'd never talked about what happened that night, so I threw out dressing up as a ghost to scare me that night. And he countered with, "What?" I figured that this had to be the biggest jewel in his prankster crown after all. Without a doubt, it was the most elaborate and time-intensive trick that he'd ever pulled off on me, and I figured that he'd laugh heartily and brag about how scared he got me. You know, and gave him details to jog his memory. But he then said, "I never did that." Now, considering he remembers every terrible thing that he had done to me, and when he was like 8, 10, or 12 years old, I cannot imagine something this big just slipping his mind like that. Like I said too, it just never seemed like it was his style or anything as well. He wasn't big on subtlety, I guess, but way more of the quick scare type, make you cry and laugh in your face type sort of thing, usually very low effort for a quick payout. I don't think he forgot at all. I have no reason to believe that he's lying. I'm not admitting that it's not his style at all, but I really don't think it was him in the end. Which begs the question, if it wasn't him, then what on earth happened that night? This past year, I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. There was about 600 miles of trail that I hiked or camped alone. one of these sections I was alone was in Northern California, slightly north of Shasta. I got to a beautiful spot and knew that it was the best spot to set up camp. It was gorgeous too, 360 views of woods in the valley below and mountains everywhere. I could see it raining on Mount Shasta at that point, probably my favorite campsite in NorCal. I still remember the exact mile and have some footage of the site during the daylight too. But I set up my camp, and after admiring the sunset, I went to bed. I could see the outside below the vestibule when I was laying down on the tent, and as I was trying to go to sleep, I saw a white light in the valley, maybe about a quarter to half a mile away, I guess. Not right near my tent or anything. I wasn't close to any towns. In the Sierra Mountains, south of the area, I would see an occasional remote cabin in the woods, so I figured that it must have just been that. But there were no access points or dirt roads up there. No forest clearings, just thick woods surrounded by mountains. I looked at the light for a bit and tried to think about what it could have been, but this was pretty remote, so I just couldn't come up with an explanation. I was tired from hiking all day though, so I didn't think too much more of it. A little later, I looked out again and noticed another light though. It was an orange light slowly circling the white light. It was also slowly morphing into a shape as it circled. I watched it for a long time, trying to understand what the heck I was looking at. It had a very calm sort of motion, and it was almost mesmerizing. It wasn't like a lot of other people's orb or UFO experiences where it sort of darts around and then just vanishes. I watched it for a little while, and eventually I fell asleep. It started raining around midnight, and I looked out of my tent and still saw both lights, one white stationary light and one orange morphing light. I woke up again at around 4 a.m. to go and pee, and walked outside of my tent, and it was still there, same motion. I tried to get a video, but due to the distance and the darkness, it looked like another terrible video that didn't show anything, so I forgot about it. In the end, I woke up at around sunrise and looked for it, but at that point, both lights were gone. I didn't see these lights around sunset or sunrise, only ever in the darkness, and I know that these would have been visible during the sunrise and sunset too. They were pretty bright. I'm sure that there's an explanation that I can come up with eventually, but I genuinely have no clue what I was looking at, and I'm still trying to figure it out. Now, unrelated a bit, I guess, but near the area that I was walking and to the right of the trail was some thick brush at some point. Maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, I would guess. This was near the Shasta Trinity Forest area, maybe 1 or 2 days after the lights of the woods. I was hiking alone, like I said, and I noticed about 100 feet away from the brush was being sort of flattened by something, and whatever it was moving very quickly. It was approaching the trail and was going to end up right next to me if I had continued my pace. I couldn't see what was flattening this brush, but whatever it was, it had to be very strong. It reminded me of something that you'd see in Jurassic Park almost. I instantly assumed that it was a bear. I still kind of think it was, but I didn't want to surprise the bear and have a close encounter or anything. So I yelled, "Stop!" And it stopped, completely. I remained still and waited to see what was going on, but it was completely still. And it was also really eerily quiet everywhere. Like total silence in the woods, which I'm not really used to. I got pretty unsettled by that, and I started talking to whatever it was while I walked by. I just kept saying things like, "Hey, I'm gonna walk by and be on my way, friend. I hope you're having a good day." I kept walking and kept looking back, but nothing moved from that point onward. Like I said, probably a bear, right? Black bears are generally like big raccoons, and they don't want to interact with humans by any means. But I've encountered a few bears before, and they always run away when I told them to get lost. like they get spooked and they leg it. Whatever this was, if it was a bear, it didn't move an inch. In fact, it just sat there and seemed to watch me. Anyway, after speaking with some other hikers that I'd met, a few people said how NorCal was a little bit unsettling. The SoCal desert is very windy, and the Sierra Mountains have tons of flowing streams. NorCal doesn't have as many streams or as much wind, so there is just a sort of silence that pervades it, which can feel ominous, especially in the dark. And really, that's my best explanation for the feeling, at least. But after going through the SoCal desert, Sierra Mountains, NorCal, Oregon, and Washington, NorCal was the only section that was definitely a little bit unnerving to me. And I did portions of each of these sections alone too. Anyway, I still have no idea what those lights were. I don't know if they're related to the sound or the thing that was in the brush that day, but part of me thinks that somehow it's all connected. Back when I was a sophomore in high school, I used to be very close friends with this girl called Kay. Kay and I met in middle school, and we instantly clicked. We would hang out after school pretty frequently too. Kay had a very turbulent childhood, I guess you could say. Deceased father, foster care, substance abuse mum, and Kay's family would house hop a lot too. Our sophomore year, Kay's family was staying with their step-aunt's ex-husband. My parents never really stressed about me hanging out with Kay because she was such a kind soul and a great influence on me. The man Kay was staying with, I'll call him R, was interesting to say the least. I remember the first incident that made me scratch my head was when we all went out to dinner with Kay and her family, and R tagged along. Kay and I were sat at the table with him, and he was venting to us, me 15 and Kay 16, about his dating life and showing us pictures of his Tinder bio and all the women he was chatting to. We both kind of laughed it off and engaged with him, not thinking much of it. Sometimes when Kay and I hung out though, I would have us come to the basement, and he had this room with a drum kit, and he'd play them for us with the lights off and all that. But anyways, the strangest encounter I personally had with him was when I went to Kay's house to hang out for the day, and she went to take a shower. While she was in the shower, I was sitting in her room, and I just so happened to wander in and told me that he wanted to show me something cool in his room. Kay's room was on the first floor, and R's room was the only room on the second floor. Being the naive girl I was, I agreed and followed him up the stairs. When he got to his room, he realized it was locked and seemed pretty annoyed and jittery because his key was apparently downstairs. Now, instead of going downstairs, R takes a credit card out of his wallet and tries to unlock the door that way. Thankfully, it didn't work, and I think at that point something clicked in my brain, and I decided to go back downstairs and sit in the bathroom with Kay until she was done with her shower. I'm now 23, and looking back on it, I don't honestly think there was anything cool to show me in that room, and I thank the moon and the stars that he never actually got that door unlocked. I never told Kay, but as we got older, I casually asked her if she had any weird encounters with him, and she said no. I'm not really sure how to end this, but I'm thankful that I never got to see what was beyond that door, because something tells me that if I had gone in that room that day, I would have come out a very different person. This encounter happened about a week ago, last Tuesday afternoon to be exact. I, a 30-year-old female, was catching up on chores and last-minute shopping on my day off. I was actually on my way home and had stopped at a gas station to fill up, so I wouldn't have to worry about it the next day before work. But the gas station that I had stopped at is usually pretty dead. It's a decent size, with like 24 pumps, I think. because of the direction that I was headed, I parked at the very last pump, the furthest from the building on the inside. At the time, there was maybe half a dozen other people at the complete opposite end, with about 4 pillars or 8 empty pumps between us. I honestly wasn't paying too much attention to anyone, until this old beat-up looking white panel van pulled up to the outside pump on the other side of mine. Now, I'll admit that I'm a huge true crime nerd, as in started reading true crime novels at like the age of 11, and got a lot of notes home to my parents for it in fact, but that's a story for another time. So that sight instantly put me on edge. I tried my best to remain casual, but kept my attention on the van, and tried to move in a way the pump wasn't blocking my escape route if needed. Now, I was positioned toward the side of the pump, closest to the building, keeping the pump between me and the stranger, when this middle-aged looking man walked toward the other end of the pump, and close to me to try to get my attention. I didn't get any closer, but did lean forward to listen to him. He kind of quietly asked if I could help him with some gas. I mentioned quietly because I had to lean forward more and asked him what, so that he would repeat himself. He didn't get any closer and almost stuttered asking if I could help him with gas, staying on the far end of the pump from me. My first thought was that he was asking for money, so I told him that I had no cash. He was very clean looking though and well groomed, so I thought that it was kind of odd that he'd be asking for money. He repeated that he just needed help with the gas, and kind of motioned to the pump. The whole situation just felt weird. He never asked for money, just kept saying help with gas, and it was at that moment that I started to think that he was actually wanting me to go to his side of the pump. He was parked in a way that the van doors were right next to the pump, and he made a point not to stand in front of them. I also noticed that he was positioned in a way that he would likely have been blocked by any cameras, and at that moment I knew that he was trying to steal my card or grab me, I think, and I would have been completely blocked from any cameras, and we were far enough away from other people and next to a busy highway that no one would have heard me if I yelled. Honestly, I was almost thinking that I was kind of just being a jerk and that what if he really did need help? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something felt wrong. I took 2 steps back in the end, making it obvious that I was putting distance between us, and flat out said no, and went back to looking at my pump. Any guilt that I did feel instantly vanished when he got back into his van and drove away. Mind you, there were still half a dozen people on the other side that he could have asked. He could have gone inside to ask someone there for help, so why only ask one person and then leave? I'm convinced that it was a grab-and-go attempt that failed, and so he bailed before any more attention was on him. I can't think of any other reason, especially if he needed to gas up a van. Why waste gas driving away before exhausting your chances of asking other people? And I know that he didn't come to me last because I watched him pull in. Now, I do know that there's a chance that he could have really needed help and I was just being a jerk. But as a lone woman, I'd rather be a jerk than dead. I'm posting this here as a PSA in a sense. If you're out and about on your own, do not put yourself in situations where you are alone. I have always tried to go to the quiet, empty places because I hate crowds, but I can see how that can be dangerous. Just bite the bullet and deal with the crowd is my advice. The more witnesses, the less likely someone will try something like this. About 10 years ago, I, a 17-year-old female at the time, had just got out of a really abusive relationship. I won't get into it, but it was a bad situation. He threatened my life, and I shrugged it off, to be honest. I'm still not sure if it was the individual who was involved, but it would make sense if it was. So my father is a tradesman and used to store an assortment of ladders beside our home. We lived in a 2-story home in a suburban neighborhood, and my room used to be on the 2nd floor. One night, shortly after the breakup, I woke up late at night and heard strange noises outside. It was a windy winter night, and I live in a place where the winds can get pretty strong, so I didn't think much of the few knocks or scratches against the house. I woke up in the morning and I went to open the curtains to let some light into my room, and that was when I noticed a perfectly cut square out from my window screen. Shivers instantly ran down my spine. I always wonder about what would have possibly happened if my window wasn't locked that night. I was paranoid for a long time after that too. Also, a couple of years later, I received a phone call from an inmate from a prison, and the automated request recording included my ex's name. I didn't answer for obvious reasons, but that was the last that I've heard from him. When I was in high school, my mother was married to a man named Donald. Now, Donald was a drunk. He worked a good job and made some good money too, so he provided for us well enough. But he filled his free time chugging vodka like water in his underwear on the couch. Donald wasn't always aggressive when he drank. However, after a day at work, he would come home, drink a bottle, and try to pick fights with me for anything that he could think of. Very often, these fights would turn physical, and while I was no lightweight, in high school on the first occasion that I fought back, he called the cops on me. As a result of this situation, once he was about 3/4 of the way through a bottle, my mother took to packing an overnight bag, having me load up and going to stay in a hotel for the night. I always stayed in the same hotel just down the street from my house, since it would allow me to go back home before school the next morning, after Donald had left for work to get ready. It was a nice place with a huge open foyer that all of the rooms surrounded, going up about 5 stories. I knew the ladies at the desk really well, as I was there 5 to 6 times a month as well. And on this occasion in question, I had gone over fairly late in the evening. The hotel had 24-hour booking at the front desk, but the girl behind the desk mentioned that they were booked up for the night. I breathed an exasperated sigh as I relayed the news and mentioned that I would just catch a bus a little ways uptown to go to another hotel. The girl behind the desk mentioned that there was one room that she could put me in, at a discounted rate no less. She was, however, hesitant to do so, saying that the owner of the hotel had taken it out of service for reasons unknown to her, but that she knew that I would be gone before the owner would arrive in the morning, and she could fudge it into the system to look like the room hadn't been occupied. I thanked her for this and accepted, not caring for the other options that I had available to me at the time. So I got the key and I went into the room, got undressed, showered, and settled into bed. I noticed too that despite her reservations, the room was immaculate. I simply couldn't fathom why a perfectly good room like this wasn't being rented out, but decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth. The room was pretty standard as far as hotel rooms go, I suppose. A single queen-sized bed, a TV on the wall to your left, a desk to your right, a mirrored closet door across from the bed with a table next to it, and a ceiling fan just past the foot of the bed. I must have fallen asleep sometime around 11 o'clock to the sound of the TV playing. Some late-night cop drama, I think. Quite comfortable in bed. Until around 2:30 in the morning. I wasn't awoken by a sound as much as a lack of sound, I think. You never realize just how jarring silence is, too, until it occurs suddenly in the night like this. As I sort of rolled to sit up, I took note of the time on the alarm clock and noticed that the TV had turned off. The room was illuminated by the light of the parking lot pouring in through the blinds, and as my vision sharpened a bit and the room properly came into focus, it was then that I noticed that I was not alone in the room. At the foot of the bed was a woman. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe. Her hair was darkened by water as if she had just gotten out of the shower, and notably, she was quite tall too. The top of her head was just 2 feet or so below the ceiling fan. She just stood at the foot of the bed with her head cocked to one side and stared at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't move either. At some point during this exchange, I convinced myself that I was just dreaming, and there was no woman in my room. So despite her standing there staring at me, I wasn't really afraid, I guess. You see, I'd had some hyper-realistic dreams before, when I was a kid after all. So I simply laid back down on my back and watched her stand there, my head tilted so that I could keep an eye on her, knowing that if I waited, she would simply disappear. And eventually she did, which gave me confirmation that it was just one of those terrible, hyper-realistic dreams. I fell back asleep, and I slept through to my morning wake-up call. Now, the lady at the front desk sounded a bit nervous when she called, so I quickly got dressed and headed out to the front desk, thinking that her boss may be coming by sooner than expected or something. And I was not expecting the conversation that I had at the front desk as I checked out. When I walked up, she started apologizing to me. I was confused, so I sort of calmed her down and asked her to explain what had her so stressed out. She took a deep breath and said, "I found out why that room was taken out of service. I came to find out, 2 weeks before I stayed in that room, a woman had stayed there while on vacation with her husband and 2 kids. She stayed behind while they went to grab breakfast one morning, and she took a shower, put on her bathrobe, and, well, hung herself from the ceiling fan with a bedsheet. Her husband found her there when he got back. The room was removed from a service as a matter of good taste until the services were held, and I didn't know any of this beforehand, and it definitely makes me wonder, did I actually see her in my room that night, or was it really just a coincidental dream?" Back when I was younger, I lived in a really big house, and in my room, there was always this dark, dusty closet that I never used. To get to it, you had to crawl through a small door about a little smaller than half the size of a normal door, and I never went in there for a reason. For one, the room was covered in child's drawings all over, words, pictures, and other disturbing and unexplainable stuff that I don't really want to talk about right now, but the quick note is that I was not like 16 in this story. I was like 8 or 9, so I was young. For the first 2 years in the house, nothing ever really happened though. It was peaceful, but eventually we had to take off the door for a reason that I forget. But when my dad first took the door off, it was fine. Sure, it smelled a little bit dusty in my room, but nothing really happened. However, that night I just couldn't sleep for some reason, and all I could smell was this terrible smell of something rotting. I kept smelling this too for another 3 nights, and I didn't want to tell my parents as they were busy all the time while this was happening, so it would just be a hassle for them, and I knew that. But I could only ever smell the rotting during the night, so I decided to go and take a look for what it could be. I looked all over my room and found nothing, and the last place to check was the closet. And inside, there was a pile of dead, rotting rats, at least 8 of them. I screamed and my parents ran in. Eventually they cleaned up the rats, confused on how they had actually gotten in there. And to be honest, we all thought that this was the end of it. But the next night, I was hearing creaking floorboards and something sort of, I don't know, like mushy moving in my room. I tried to ignore it but couldn't fall asleep. And the next morning I found all of my dolls had black paint on them and holes in their faces. I ran to my parents asking if they did it, and they said no. I asked my cousin as she had been over a few days before, and she said no. I didn't really have friends at the time because we lived in the middle of nowhere, so there was really nobody else that could have done it. The next morning I had a smudge of black paint on my face. Our paint is still in boxes in the storage room, mind you, so I was really confused by that. Once I got the paint off, I realized that underneath the paint, I was also bleeding a little bit. Not a terrible amount, but more than the amount from a paper cut for sure. The next night, I decided to go into the closet, and I found a small whiteboard with a heart on it. And that, for whatever reason, was the last night that I ever heard stuff from in there. It was weird and uncomfortable, and for all I know it could have been a prank, but there were some things that I don't think that you would do in a prank, like make me bleed at night. Either way, I just recently remembered this, and I just wanted to share it with all of you guys. It's a really weird part of my life and a strange story, I know that, but I don't know. What do you guys think it was? When I was younger and just got into online college, I got my first apartment. I had 3 jobs and one was third shift, but I was more than ready for the independence, so I didn't mind. While I had a great time there, I did have one problem though, my new downstairs neighbor. So the other tenants are a bit older than I am, with one of them being an old man who lived there for like 20 years. The other was an older woman with a small kid, probably been there for 3 to 4 years, and an empty apartment downstairs. I keep to myself pretty much, so I never really spoke to any of them before, until I noticed that there was a new move-in, a man that seemed close to my age, maybe a little bit older, black, greasy hair and a little overweight, but in my experience of living here, people seemed nice enough and I was happy to possibly have someone to say hello to. That possibility turned sour though really quick when a casual hello turned into "that trash stinks" remarks from him when I was taking out the trash, and other snide remarks under his breath when I've done nothing, even remarking on my sister's lack of a bra when she came to visit me. Naturally, I was grossed out and annoyed that he had to comment on anyone, especially my sister, and told the landlord. Nothing came of it, of course, but one day I was asleep and someone came banging on my door. I had no idea who it was, and my anxiety was beyond strong. I'm alone and never expect a knock that wasn't planned, so it was weird, but it was the neighbor saying that I was being too loud and I need to stop harassing him. I explained through a closed door that I was asleep and that I was not making any noise. He left and stomped down the stairs while muttering and calling me names. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest though, and I went back to bed, only to hear him coming back up the stairs and bang on my door again. When I addressed him again, he said that I was harassing him and that he's calling the cops because I'm still making noise. I told him to ask the other neighbor because there's no way that I could possibly be making noise when he's on the other side of the building. He thanks me politely before stomping off and cursing and calling me names yet again. I tell the landlord right away that one of his tenants is acting hostile, and I don't feel comfortable or safe, and he tells me that he'll look into it. I hear nothing though for a whole week. But it turns out that it was the old neighbor hitting the floor with a stick like one of those classic cartoons because the rude neighbor was playing music too loud. I swear that he should have known that too, as I'm on the other side of the building. It was like he wanted an excuse to come and speak to me almost. Anyway, the following months it got even worse, and one day I walked out in a snowsuit so that I can play in the snow. Big kid at heart. He had to remark on my clothing being unnecessary, even when there's 3 feet of snow out. I forgot what I said in response, something like it's not his business, but he basically just swore at me. I just walked off to go and play in the snow. It gave me little enjoyment because of the earlier interaction, so in the end I just went back home to get ready for work. The snowstorm, it got worse though, and I had just come back home from my night shift. I see him alone in the parking lot with the car on and the windows up. I was on high alert as I carefully walked around and up the alley to my apartment, but the second that I closed the door to go upstairs, I hear loud, wall-shaking music. It's him. He's blasting his car music at max volume in a snowstorm at 3 in the morning. I was surprised and confused because what was his reasoning? He did it until 8 o'clock in the morning, and I found out later that it was to spite the old neighbor for telling him his music was too loud. Soon, it all started getting pretty serious though. Cursing in the hallway and playing the music louder, with the police knocking at our doors asking us about a noise disturbance, and now a mutual hatred amongst the neighbors as this guy who just kept us all up all night. But that's not the worst part of it. You see, I just got back home from my night shift and it's 3 in the morning yet again. I'm dragging my tired feet over to the mailboxes that are right inside the townhouse's door, and as I'm looking through the ads and the letters, his door opens at the top of the stairs. My stomach tightens, hoping that I don't have to interact with him, but drops when he starts speaking unintelligibly. At the top of the stairs, he's gurgling and mumbling something. I asked him, "What?" But he repeats the same weird sounds again, only more aggressive. I felt something was more than off at this point, and I noped right around and out the door, heading back to my car. I thought to myself that I would rather sleep in my car than possibly be attacked in the hallway. And as I'm having this thought, I hear the window above slam open. I freeze and then spin back around to the edge of the corner, and it's him. He's looking for me out of the window. I stand there for a moment listening to him, and he's speaking gibberish and yelling. I thought to myself that this was my chance to sneak upstairs, past his door and into my apartment. I quickly sped up the stairs and past his door to the second flight of the stairs, and right as I reached the top of the second flight of the stairs, his door swings open with a big slam that makes me jump, and I hear him muttering and gibberishly speaking loudly while walking up the stairs. My heart is beating out of my ribcage as I'm simultaneously walking and fishing my keys out of my bag. Like a classic horror movie, I kept fumbling the keys, looking for the correct one in the dark hallway as I hear him walking up the last couple of steps. I'm mentally telling myself not to panic as I spot the correct key and slide it into the hole on the first go. I swing the door open and practically launch myself inside before slamming it shut behind me. I pause and hold my breath as I hear him just 5 feet from my door, muttering gibberish and calling me names again, before walking back down the stairs and out of the building. I watched him through a crack in my window, blind, sort of pacing back and forth, muttering, cursing, and at one point screaming before walking off into the night. With a little bit of relief, I head to bed hoping that he doesn't come back. The next day, I get a text from the landlord, and he says that apparently this guy got arrested and won't be coming back. Seems he was off his meds again, and attaches a link in the text. Of course, I raised an eyebrow to that comment, thinking, now you tell me. But the link showed that there was a mugshot of him and a description of his nightly activity, to include stealing from a turkey hill, threatening cops that he's going to shoot them, punching one of them, and previous to all of this said earlier in the night when he dropped his pants and rubbed himself against a window, then ran down the town square while yelling and screaming. I never did see him again, just his family coming in and moving his stuff out. But man, I am so glad that I got into that door that night, because if I hadn't, I shudder to think what might have happened.